Hey there, tonight we're uncovering how samurai truly survived the chaos of feudal battles. Not the romanticized duels of honor you might imagine, but the gritty reality where strategy and resilience were as crucial as skill with a katana. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1185, and you're knee-deep in the glorious mess that is the Heian period of Japan. You're not just any bystander, you're a samurai in the making, caught amidst the swirl of political chaos and clan rivalries. Forget the Hollywood shimmer of katana-wielding warriors with their flawless hair and zen-like calm. Real life is far grittier and, quite frankly, a lot more interesting. Society is a bit of a patchwork quilt right now. The emperor, theoretically, holds the reins of power, but reality is more like a game of musical chairs with the Fujiwara, Terra, and Minamoto clans vying for the best seat. You're part of this turbulent mix, and you're learning fast that survival hinges on more than just swinging a sword. Your journey to becoming a samurai isn't a birthright, but a career choice, if we can call the constant threat of death a career. Born into a world where regional clans wield more power than the central government, you're shaped by the socio-political chaos around you. It's like being born into a perpetual game of who's the boss, but with more bloodshed. The decentralized power structure means your allegiance is crucial. Clans are like the original neighborhood gangs, and you better pick the right one or face the consequences. You're not just a warrior, you're part of a complex web of loyalty and service, and your clan's power, or lack thereof, determines your fate. This is a time when land equals power, and power means everything. If you're lucky, your clan controls enough land to make a decent living and afford the tools of your trade. And speaking of tools, let's talk about the economic realities of gearing up for battle. Armor and weaponry don't come cheap. A suit of armor can cost you the equivalent of a small mansion, considering that a full set might run you around 20 can. A hefty sum when you realize that one can is roughly equivalent to 1,000 coins. It's like walking into a luxury car dealership with dreams of a Bugatti, but the budget for a beat-up sedan. Most samurai are stuck with hand-me-downs, patched armor, and weapons that have seen better days. But hey, as long as it protects your vital organs, you're golden, right? Your trusty katana, the symbol of your warrior status, is more than just a sharp piece of steel. It's a family heirloom, an investment, and a status symbol all rolled into one lethal package. Crafted with precision and care, it's a work of art that comes with a price tag to match. If you're buying new, expect to shell out around 1 can. Again, not exactly pocket change. But don't worry, you can always hope that your enemies drop theirs in the heat of battle. The economic strain doesn't stop at weapons and armor. Maintaining your status as a samurai involves a continuous loop of expenses. You need to look the part, train hard, and stay ready for the next call to battle. This isn't just about personal pride. It's about survival in a world where the next skirmish is always just over the horizon. Of course, the life of a samurai isn't all doom and gloom. There's a certain romantic appeal to the notion of living by a code, Bushido, the way of the warrior. But let's be real. You follow this code because it's a necessity. It's less about honor and more about ensuring you don't get an unexpected end to your story. Duty, loyalty, and bravery are your daily bread, not just lofty ideals to hang on the wall. In the midst of this turbulent time, you learn to navigate the complexities of war and peace. You're a soldier, a diplomat, and occasionally a farmer. Yes, when you're not slicing through enemies or pledging your allegiance, you're tending to rice paddies or managing your clan's lands. It's a balancing act that doesn't leave much room for error. The land is as much a part of your identity as your sword. Primary sources from this era paint a vivid picture. Take, for instance, the Tale of the Hike, which recounts the Genpei War, a conflict that saw the Terra and Minamoto clans vying for control. It's a saga filled with strategy, betrayal, and the harsh realities of war. You're living in this story, a minor character in a grand narrative of power struggles and shifting allegiances. So, as you strap on your armor and ready your katana, remember, you're not just a character in a historical drama. You're part of the real, gritty world of the samurai, where survival is an art form, and each decision could be your last. It's a life of constant uncertainty, but it's also a life filled with purpose, and the chance to etch your name in the annals of history. No pressure, right? And so, with your armor strapped, and katana at the ready, you step onto the battlefield, not as a lone swordsman in search of glory, but as a cog in the intricate machinery of feudal warfare. Forget those Hollywood images of individual samurai dueling in slow motion under cherry blossoms. The reality is a chaotic blend of strategy, teamwork, and a fair bit of dirt. The Kamakura period, spanning from 1185 to 1333, isn't just about the sharpness of your blade, it's about the sharpness of your wits. First up, let's talk strategy. The samurai weren't just brawlers with swords, they were tacticians. Battles weren't won by the strength of one man, but by the collective might of formations like the Hoshi, star, and Yama, mountain. These weren't just poetic names. They were practical layouts aimed at maximizing the effectiveness of troops. The star formation, for instance, allowed samurai to protect the center while being able to respond rapidly to attacks from any direction. It's like a medieval version of surround sound, but with more yelling and less Dolby. Now, the mountain formation. Imagine a human fortress, with layers of warriors creating a formidable defensive line. The idea was simple. Create a bulwark that could withstand frontal assaults while allowing archers to rain down chaos from the sides. It's the samurai equivalent of come at me, bro, but with a strategic twist that could turn the tide of a battle. These formations weren't just random assortments of troops. They were carefully planned, leveraging the strengths of each warrior and the terrain to deadly effect. Speaking of terrain, the samurai were masters of using the land to their advantage. Japan's mountainous landscape wasn't just a backdrop. It was a key player in warfare. High ground offered a tactical edge, allowing archers to pepper advancing troops with arrows before they even got close. Forests provided cover for ambushes, turning the natural environment into a weapon just as deadly as any sword. And then there's the weather. Rain could turn roads into mud traps, slowing down enemy movements, while fog could conceal troop movements until it was too late for the opposition. It was like Mother Nature herself was playing favorites, and the samurai knew exactly how to make her an ally. But let's not forget the gritty logistics. Horses. Every samurai needed one, but they weren't just trotting around for the fun of it. A good war horse was the medieval equivalent of a sports car, and just like today, they didn't come cheap. Buying a horse could set you back about 5 to 10 can, a hefty investment for a warrior on a budget. Maintaining these equine companions involved a steady supply of feed and care, because a sick horse was as useful as a sword made of tofu. Oh, and did I mention transportation? Moving an army was no small feat. Supplies, troops, horses. It was like organizing a rock band's tour, but with more spears and fewer groupies. Now, let's tackle a popular myth, the romantic notion of the one-on-one samurai duel. While these did happen, they were more the exception than the rule. Large-scale battles weren't a series of epic showdowns. They were chaotic clashes where strategy and numbers often trumped individual heroics. Imagine a rugby match where everyone has a sword, and you're getting closer to the truth. The goal was to win, not to star in your own personal action scene. That said, personal glory wasn't completely off the table. Individual acts of bravery could earn you a reputation, but they were a risky business. A single mistake on the battlefield could end your story faster than a Netflix cancellation. In this melee of swords, arrows, and screaming warriors, the samurai's famed code of honor, Bushido, might seem like a quaint notion. Yet it played a crucial role, not as a set of rigid rules, but as a guiding philosophy. Bushido emphasized loyalty, discipline, and courage, virtues that ensured coherence and morale in the face of chaos. In a world where allies could become enemies by the next sunrise, Bushido was the binding force that held the shifting sands of loyalty together. So, as you find yourself amidst the clash and clamor of battle, remember this. Survival isn't just about swinging a sword. It's about understanding the nuances of strategy, leveraging the landscape, and playing the long game of politics and power. It's a world where your next move could make you a hero, or just another name in the footnotes of history. And sometimes, the difference between the two is as thin as the edge of your blade. Fast forward a few centuries, and the world of the samurai has done a somersault worthy of Olympic gold. Welcome to the Edo period, where the samurai's life is less about swinging swords and more about shuffling papers. It's like going from a rock star to a desk job, but with more poetry and fewer groupies. The year is 1603, and we're under the Tokugawa shogunate, a regime that decided it was high time to swap the chaos of war for the predictability of peace. Now, don't get me wrong, peace is generally a good thing, unless you're a professional warrior whose career prospects just took a nosedive. The samurai, who once thrived on the battlefield, are now navigating the bureaucratic maze of governance. Imagine a knight swapping his lance for a ledger. It's not just a career change, it's a complete lifestyle overhaul. Enter the new samurai, part warrior, part government official, and part cultural icon. The transition didn't happen overnight, nor was it particularly smooth. The economic shifts were seismic. With no wars to fight, the samurai's martial prowess became less valuable than their ability to manage estates and collect taxes. Land, once the ultimate prize of conquest, became the currency of peace. The samurai found themselves landlords, overseeing peasants who worked the land they once fought over. In this new role, the samurai's katana was less a tool of war and more a symbol of status. It's like having a fancy smartphone that you never used to actually make calls. The ornate sword was a reminder of their noble past, but its practical use dwindled faster than a New Year's resolution. Instead, the samurai focused on mastering the arts of peace, literally. They became patrons of tea ceremonies, poetry, and no theatre, adding a cultural feather to their caps. Talk about a plot twist. The economic landscape was shifting like quicksand. The samurai, traditionally paid in rice, found their stipends shrinking as peasant uprisings and natural disasters dented agricultural output. Picture this. You're expecting a bonus, but instead you're told the company's cutting costs due to a bad harvest. Not exactly a morale booster. Some samurai had to moonlight as artisans or craftsmen to make ends meet, a humbling reality for those used to the prestige of the battlefield. Now, let's tackle a myth that's as stubborn as a mule. The idea that the samurai were always noble and virtuous. Sure, the Bushido code emphasized loyalty, honor, and discipline, but reality often danced to a different tune. Corruption and power plays were as common as cherry blossoms in spring. Some samurai took advantage of their positions, lining their pockets at the expense of the peasants they were supposed to protect. It's not all hacus and heroics in this bureaucratic jungle. Culturally, the Edo period was a renaissance of swords. With the sword sheathed, the brush took center stage. Samurai became patrons of the arts, and their influence permeated literature, painting, and theater. The ukiyo-e prints, those vibrant woodblock images we all know and love, flourished under their watchful eyes. It was an era where the samurai's legacy was as much about ink and paper as it was about blood and steel. Yet, this cultural blossoming coexisted with societal challenges. The rigid class system remained, but with peace, the lines began to blur. Merchants, once considered beneath the samurai, amassed wealth and influence, shaking up the social order like a snow globe. The samurai, stuck in their hierarchical ways, found themselves in an economic bind, often indebted to the very merchants they disdained. It's like a rock band needing a loan from the groupies they used to snub. Politically, the Tokugawa shogunate's isolationist policies, sakoku, or closed country, kept Japan largely cut off from the rest of the world. This self-imposed seclusion was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it preserved Japanese culture from foreign influences. On the other, it stifled technological and economic advancements. The samurai, now more pencil pusher than powerhouse, were caught in this paradox, maintaining order in a society resistant to change. Despite these challenges, the samurai still exuded an aura of romantic mystique. The notion of living by a code, even in a world of peace, held a certain allure. But let's be real. Many samurai were just trying to keep up with the Joneses of feudal Japan while grappling with existential questions about their role in this new order. It wasn't all poetry and calligraphy. It was also about survival in a world where their traditional skills had become obsolete. The samurai's decline in martial prominence also reflected broader economic shifts. The rise of a market economy and the development of cities like Edo, modern-day Tokyo, transformed Japan. Urbanization brought new opportunities and challenges as samurai mingled with merchants, artisans, and peasants in the bustling cityscapes. The samurai's traditional status was increasingly at odds with the commercial realities of urban life. In this new era, personal wealth wasn't just about land, it was about cash flow. Samurai found themselves juggling finances, often poorly, as they navigated a system that rewarded entrepreneurial spirit over hereditary privilege. It's like realizing that your trust fund is running dry and you've got to figure out how to hustle. So here we are, in a time where the samurai's sword is more ceremonial than practical, their armor gathering dust as they trade war stories for tales of fiscal prudence and cultural patronage. The Edo period is a testament to the adaptability of the samurai, who managed to reinvent themselves in the face of peace and prosperity. Yet, as the world around them continued to evolve, the samurai's place in society became increasingly precarious. As we ponder the legacy of the samurai, it's clear that their story is one of transformation and resilience. From warriors to bureaucrats, they navigated a landscape of change with a tenacity that's hard to ignore. Their journey isn't over yet. The stage is set for more twists and turns as we delve deeper into the cultural and societal shifts that define their new lifestyle. Stay tuned, because the story of the samurai is far from finished, and the next chapter is just around the corner. As we wade deeper into the Edo period, it's time to put the samurai's new lifestyle under the microscope. You see, while their swords might have been gathering dust, their minds were anything but idle. The era's peace and stability turned these former warriors into the intellectual heavyweights of their time, sponsoring a cultural renaissance that would make even the Renaissance itself blush a little. First up, let's talk about Bushido, the guiding philosophy that was more than just an IKEA instruction manual for samurai living. Bushido wasn't just about swinging a sword with finesse. It was a code that emphasized virtues like loyalty, honor, and discipline. Think of it as the samurai's version of a self-help book, but with fewer platitudes and more life-or-death consequences. This wasn't about looking good on a social media profile. It was about surviving feudal Japan with your head and honor intact. In this era of peace, Bushido evolved into something beyond mere survival. With no battles to test their mettle, samurai turned inward, seeking to perfect themselves and their society. The code became a philosophical pursuit, a quest for moral and spiritual growth. It's like when a rock band trades in their electric guitars for an acoustic set, an introspective turn that reveals depth beneath the bravado. Now, let's not pretend Bushido was some universally adopted creed. The romantic notion of all samurai walking the tightrope of honor is a bit of a stretch. Plenty of samurai were more concerned with their rice stipends than philosophical musings. But for those who embraced it, Bushido offered a framework for living a life of integrity and purpose, even when the battlefield was swapped for a bureaucratic desk. The cultural boom of the Edo period didn't stop at philosophical ruminations. The samurai became patrons of the arts, transforming Japan into a hotbed of creativity and innovation. We're talking tea ceremonies that rivaled anything Starbucks could concoct, poetry that made even the most hardened samurai shed a tear, and no theater performances that were the Netflix binges of their day. Let's not forget the role of ukiyo-e prints, those exquisite woodblock images that captured the vibrant, fleeting world of Edo Japan. These prints weren't just pretty pictures. They were cultural commentaries, snapshots of the social dynamics of the time. And guess who was funding these masterpieces? You guessed it, our erstwhile warriors. The samurai's patronage helped fuel this artistic flourish, showcasing their newfound role as cultural tastemakers. But here's where the plot thickens. The economic realities of supporting the arts weren't exactly straightforward. The samurai, still being paid in rice, found themselves financially squeezed by the costs of cultural patronage. It's like trying to fund a lavish lifestyle on a ramen noodle budget. Yet, despite the economic strain, the samurai persisted, driven by a desire to leave a legacy beyond the battlefield. Now, let's delve into the primary sources of the time to get a taste of the samurai's worldview. Consider the writings of Yamamoto Tsunetomo, author of the Hagakure, a seminal work on Bushido. Tsunetomo's words offer a window into the samurai mindset, capturing the tension between martial tradition and the demands of a peaceful society. The way of the samurai is found in death, he famously wrote, a stark reminder that even in peace, the specter of mortality loomed large over these warriors-turned-bureaucrats. Yet, The samurai's embrace of death wasn't some morbid obsession. It was a philosophical acceptance of life's impermanence, a recognition that true honor lay in living fully and fearlessly. It's a bit like that old saying about living each day as if it's your last, but with a bit more edge and a lot more poetry. In this intellectual and artistic boom, the samurai weren't just passive consumers. They were active participants, creators, and curators of culture. They wrote poetry, practiced calligraphy, and even engaged in Zen meditation, seeking enlightenment in a world that increasingly valued introspection over aggression. The samurai's transformation from warriors to sages was as dramatic as it was profound. The samurai's cultural impact extended beyond the arts and philosophy. Their influence permeated education, with the establishment of schools and academies that taught not just martial skills, but also literature, ethics, and the sciences. The samurai became the educators of their time, fostering a literate and informed society. It's like they traded in their swords for chalkboards, shaping the minds of future generations. Yet, this cultural renaissance wasn't without its challenges. The rigid social hierarchy of Edo Japan meant that despite their cultural contributions, samurai still had to navigate a society resistant to change. The rise of the merchant class, with their newfound wealth and influence, posed an existential threat to the samurai's traditional status. It's like the cool kids at school suddenly finding themselves outpaced by the nerds with the killer stock portfolios. In this shifting landscape, the samurai's adherence to Bushido became even more vital. It provided a sense of identity and purpose in a world where their martial prowess was increasingly irrelevant. The samurai's commitment to their code, even in the face of societal upheaval, is a testament to their resilience and adaptability. So, as we wrap up this exploration of the samurai's cultural renaissance, it's clear that their legacy is far more complex than the simple warrior image often portrayed. They were philosophers, artists, educators, and patrons, shaping the cultural fabric of Edo Japan in ways that continue to resonate today. While the samurai's swords may have been sheathed, their minds were anything but idle. The peace of the Edo period allowed for an intellectual and artistic boom that redefined their role in society. As we move forward into the final chapter of their story, we'll see how the samurai navigated the challenges of a rapidly changing world, leaving an indelible mark on history that goes far beyond the battlefield. Stay tuned, because the saga of the samurai is far from over, and the next twist is just around the corner. As we move forward into the final chapter of the samurai saga, the stage is set for a seismic shift that could rival any plot twist in a Shakespearean drama. Picture Japan in the mid-19th century, a country that's been playing the isolationist card like a pro poker player, suddenly faced with a world knocking at its door with steamships and cannonballs. Cue the curtain rise on the Meiji Restoration, the period when Japan decided it was time to ditch the feudal system like a bad date and swipe right on modernization. The year is 1868, and the Meiji Restoration is shaking things up with the force of a sumo wrestler stepping into a kiddie pool. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had been calling the shots for over 2 centuries, finds itself dethroned faster than a reality TV star with a scandal. The emperor, that figurehead who'd been collecting dust in the political attic, is dusted off and put back on the main stage as the central power. But this isn't just a change of hats. It's a full-blown societal overhaul. At the heart of this transformation is the push towards modernization. Japan, having peeked over the fence to see the Industrial Revolution partying hard in the West, decides it's high time to join the bash. The Meiji government, in a move that would make Marie Kondo proud, starts decluttering the old feudal ways. Samurai stipends are slashed. Land is redistributed, and the class system is given a democratizing facelift. It's like someone hit the reset button on Japanese society, and not everyone's thrilled about it. For the samurai, this is a plot twist they didn't see coming. Imagine being a warrior whose entire identity is based on a code of honor and a sword that's now more decorative than deadly. The newly formed conscript army, trained and equipped with the latest Western military tech, makes the traditional samurai look about as useful as a flip phone in the age of smartphones. Talk about a blow to the ego. Economically, the samurai are caught in a vice grip, with their rice stipends reduced to a trickle and the abolition of the feudal domains, many find themselves financially adrift. Some attempt to pivot, diving into business ventures or government positions, but it's a tough gig. The skills that once earned them prestige and power don't translate well to the new economy. It's like trying to sell typewriters in the age of laptops. Yet, amidst the upheaval, the samurai spirit doesn't just vanish into the ether. Many adapt, embodying the resilience that once saw them through battles. Some find new paths as educators, leveraging their literacy and discipline to shape the minds of the next generation. Others immerse themselves in the arts, preserving the cultural heritage that defined their era. It's a testament to the adaptability of the human spirit, proving that even when the sword is sheathed for good, the mind remains sharp. But let's not sugarcoat it. This transition is brutal for many samurai. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by Seigo Takamori, is a poignant example. Seigo, a former samurai, rallies disaffected warriors in a last-ditch effort to resist the changes, but the rebellion is crushed by the imperial army, armed with the latest in Western weaponry. The defeat marks the final nail in the coffin for samurai military power, signaling the end of an era. Now, let's bust a few myths. The romanticized image of the samurai as noble knights of the East often glosses over the gritty realities they faced. Yes, they lived by a code, but that didn't exempt them from human flaws. Corruption, betrayal, and power struggles were as much a part of their world as honor and loyalty. The Meiji Restoration didn't just dismantle the samurai class. It also exposed the cracks in the idealized veneer of Bushido. It's a reminder that history, like people, is complex and layered. So, what about the samurai's legacy? Well, it's far from a relic of the past. In modern Japan, the samurai ethos still resonates. The principles of discipline, loyalty, and perseverance continue to influence everything from corporate culture to martial arts. The iconic katana may be more of a museum piece than a weapon, but its symbolism endures, representing a link to a storied past. In pop culture, the samurai have achieved near-mythical status, inspiring countless films, books, and video games. Their tales of bravery and tragedy captivate audiences worldwide, a testament to the enduring allure of these warriors. Yet, it's crucial to remember that behind the myth lies a history of real people navigating a rapidly changing world, much like us today. As we conclude this journey through the world of the samurai, it's clear that their story is one of transformation, resilience, and enduring impact. From the battlefields of the Heian period to the bureaucratic halls of Edo, Japan, and the tumultuous changes of the Meiji Restoration, the samurai have left an indelible mark on history. Their legacy is a reminder that while the world may change, the human spirit's capacity to adapt and endure remains a constant. So, the next time you think of the samurai, remember that they were more than just warriors. They were philosophers, artists, and agents of change, navigating a world in flux with a grace and tenacity that continues to inspire. As the curtain falls on this chapter of history, we can take solace in knowing that the spirit of the samurai lives on, a timeless testament to the power of transformation. In the bustling chaos of ancient China's spring and autumn period, where warlords were as common as noodles in a Beijing street market, a baby named Kang Qiu entered the scene in 551 BCE in the state of Lu. This was a time when peace was as rare as a unicorn sighting, and every noble with a sword thought they were destined for greatness. But into this melee of ambition and bloodshed came Confucius, a man destined to become ancient China's most famous philosopher, and incidentally, someone who would never have been hired by a modern HR department. Confucius' beginnings were anything but glamorous. His family was about as well off as a shoe repair shop in a world where everyone went barefoot. Born to noble lineage, sure, but after his father's untimely death, the family was left with more debts than treasures. His childhood was probably spent not in the lap of luxury, but rather learning the fine art of making do. Apparently, Confucius means Master Kang. But don't let the title fool you. It wasn't exactly raining gold coins in the Kang household. Now, let's talk about the spring and autumn period, named so because historians have a flair for the poetic, even when describing times that were anything but. This era was marked by fragmentation, with the once mighty Zhou dynasty reduced to little more than a figurehead. while powerful states like Lu, Kai, and Jin played a high-stakes game of risk. Confucius grew up amidst this backdrop of division and near-constant warfare, which no doubt gave him plenty of material to ponder over. It was a bit like growing up in a soap opera, but with more swords and fewer commercial breaks. Confucius, with his insatiable appetite for knowledge, was a classic overachiever. He devoured the ancient texts like they were candy and developed a particular fondness for the Book of Songs, an anthology of verses that was part instruction manual, part karaoke collection. But all this learning was a solitary pursuit. Confucius didn't have the luxury of a prestigious academy. He was his own teacher, his own mentor, and probably his own biggest critic. In his 20s, Confucius took a dive into the world of politics, a decision akin to jumping into shark-infested waters wearing a meat suit. He became a low-level bureaucrat, and let's just say he was about as comfortable in that role as a cat in a bath. The bureaucracy of Lu was a hot mess, a tangled web of nepotism, corruption, and power plays that would make House of Cards look like Sesame Street. Confucius, with his idealistic visions of morality and ethics, was a pebble trying to hold back a landslide. Despite the overwhelming odds, Confucius learned the ropes, sometimes the hard way. He was thrust into governance, where he quickly discovered that theory and practice were about as similar as night and day. It was a steep learning curve, filled with more facepalms than triumphs. But it was also here that he began to formulate his ideas on government and society, ideas that would one day be compiled into the Analects by his loyal disciples. Confucius' stint in politics wasn't without its comedic moments. There's a charming, albeit slightly apocryphal tale of how he attempted to standardize weights and measures in Lu, which was about as successful as trying to organize a rave in a library. People were more interested in bending the rules than following them, and Confucius must have felt like he was trying to herd cats. But it was these experiences that shaped his thinking, giving him a first-hand look at the flaws of humanity and providing the raw material for his later teachings. While Confucius didn't exactly blaze a trail to the top of the bureaucratic ladder, he did manage to leave his mark. His time in government taught him the importance of virtue and morality in leadership, concepts that were as foreign to the rulers of the time as a smartphone would have been. Confucius believed that a ruler should govern by example, leading with integrity, a revolutionary idea in a world where might makes right was the prevailing philosophy. Confucius' early life and political career were a study in contrasts. On one hand, he was a man of humble origins, a self-made scholar who clawed his way up through sheer determination. On the other, he was an idealist trying to make sense of a world that often seemed to operate on the principles of chaos and self-interest. His theories were born from the tension between these two realities, a blend of practicality and idealism that would eventually influence the course of Chinese history. As we move forward, keep in mind the disparity between the myth of Confucius, the serene sage dispensing wisdom from on high, and the reality of a man who had to fight tooth and nail against the entrenched systems of his day. His life was a testament to perseverance, a reminder that even the greatest thinkers can come from the humblest beginnings. Confucius may not have had it easy, but his journey from obscure bureaucrat to revered philosopher is a testament to the enduring power of ideas. And if nothing else, his story is a reminder that sometimes the best way to understand the world is to dive into the madness and see what you can learn along the way. Confucius' journey from the tangled mess of Lu's bureaucracy to the open road was like swapping a soggy paperweight for a wild roller coaster ride. It wasn't a clean break, more like an existential crisis wrapped in a midlife epiphany. Here was a man in his 50s, staring down at a life that had promised much and delivered little, at least in terms of the societal overhaul he envisioned. So, he did what any self-respecting philosopher would do. He quit his job and hit the dirt paths of ancient China, wandering like a sage with a serious travel bug. Now, you might picture this as some kind of serene, monk-like pilgrimage, but let's be real. Confucius was stepping into a society that was as hospitable to new ideas as a porcupine is to a hug. He was armed with nothing but his scrolls and a head full of moral lectures, ready to face a world of warlords who were about as interested in ethics as a cat is in learning to fetch. But Confucius, ever the optimist, believed he could change minds one ruler at a time. His travels took him to various states, where his attempts to enlighten the local rulers were met with reactions ranging from polite indifference to outright laughter. Imagine trying to convince a power-hungry warlord that ruling with virtue and benevolence would bring peace and prosperity. To these rulers, in the thick of a dog-eat-dog world, Confucius' ideas must have sounded like the ramblings of a dreamer who had spent too much time in the library. Take Duke Ai of Lu, for example. One of the first starts on Confucius' tour of moral enlightenment. Duke Ai was more interested in his own legacy than in the ethical governance Confucius was peddling. It was like trying to sell a raincoat in the Sahara. Confucius, with his high ideals, found himself on the receiving end of eye rolls and dismissive nods. Yet undeterred, he moved on, accumulating a band of loyal followers who saw in him a glimpse of something greater. His journey wasn't exactly a smooth ride. The roads of ancient China were perilous, and the hospitality of the rulers was often as warm as a Siberian winter. There were times when Confucius and his disciples faced hunger, danger, and the kind of rejection that would make a door-to-door salesman weep. Yet, through it all, Confucius maintained his belief in the power of virtue. He was like a human embodiment of a motivational poster, unwavering in his pursuit of a more just society. One memorable encounter was with Duke Ling of Wei, a ruler with a reputation as colorful as a peacock in a paint factory. Duke Ling was a man who lived for his own pleasures and had a court that was a veritable circus of indulgence. Confucius, with his lectures on virtue and restraint, must have seemed like the ultimate party pooper. The Duke's court listened politely, then promptly went back to their revelry. For Confucius, it was another lesson in the stubbornness of human nature, but not all was in vain. Confucius did manage to find some receptive ears. One such instance was with Jai Kangxi, the chief minister of Lu, who, despite his initial skepticism, found himself intrigued by the Confucian doctrine. This was a rare victory, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the world was ready for a change. It was a small victory, but in a landscape dominated by swords and cynicism, even a single convert was a triumph. Confucius' travels spanned over a decade, a testament to his endurance and sheer stubbornness. He covered hundreds of miles, a feat considering the state of roads and the quality of ancient Chinese footwear. Along the way, he gathered more disciples, spreading his teachings through anecdotes and sharp, memorable sayings that would later be recorded in the Analects. These were not dry lectures, but lively discussions, brimming with the kind of wisdom that still resonates today. Despite the challenges, Confucius never lost his sense of humor. He was known for his sharp wit and ability to laugh in the face of adversity. There's a story of how he once quipped that a ruler who governs by moral force is like the North Star, which stays in its place while all the other stars revolve around it. It was a poetic way of saying that true leadership attracts followers naturally, without coercion, a revolutionary idea in a world ruled by force. By the time he returned to Lu, Confucius was no longer just a wandering teacher. He was a philosopher whose ideas had taken root, albeit slowly. It was a journey marked by more setbacks than victories, more skepticism than acceptance. Yet, it laid the groundwork for what would eventually become a cornerstone of Chinese philosophy. Confucius' midlife crisis was not just a personal turning point, it was a pivotal moment in history. His decision to leave behind the comforts of government work for the uncertainties of the road was a gamble, one that paid off in ways he could never have imagined. His teachings, once dismissed, would go on to shape the ethical framework of not just China, but much of East Asia. And while he didn't live to see the full impact of his work, his legacy would endure for millennia. As we pause here, remember that Confucius' story is far from over. This is just the middle act in a life that would continue to influence countless generations. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we'll dive deeper into the philosophies that emerged from this journey and the impact they had on the world. Until then, ponder the wisdom of Master Kang and how it might still apply to our own tangled webs of modern life. Confucius returned to Lu with his head full of ideas and his sandals worn thin, ready to unleash his philosophical arsenal. It wasn't a grand homecoming with trumpets and confetti, but more of a quiet arrival, like slipping back into familiar, slightly uncomfortable shoes. Yet he came back armed with radical notions that could flip the status quo like a pancake. First up in Confucius' philosophical toolkit, filial piety, or Zairo, for those who prefer their concepts with a side of Mandarin flair. In a nutshell, this was all about respecting one's parents and ancestors, not just in the say please and thank you kind of way, but with a deep, almost religious fervor. Imagine treating family dinners like sacred rituals, and you're halfway there. Confucius believed this was the cornerstone of a harmonious society, because if you can't respect mom and dad, how are you supposed to respect the state? Filial piety wasn't just a matter of nice family dinners, though. It involved a lifetime commitment, a 24/7 subscription to the idea that family loyalty is paramount. Confucius argued that this loyalty extended beyond the grave, with rituals and offerings ensuring that ancestors were adequately pampered in the afterlife. Now, some might scoff at the notion of ancestor appeasement, but this was Confucius' way of ensuring societal stability. He was like the original family therapist, preaching that strong familial bonds formed the bedrock of a stable society. Next on Confucius' philosophical hit list was the concept of the junzi, the gentleman or superior person, which sounds like a title someone might slap on their LinkedIn profile today. But in Confucius' world, being a junzi was less about social status and more about moral integrity. This wasn't a VIP pass to the Noble Club, but an invitation to a lifelong pursuit of virtue. The junzi was expected to embody qualities like righteousness, propriety, and a commitment to learning, a tall order in a world where deceit was often as common as street food. Confucius' junzi wasn't just a theoretical construct. It was a direct challenge to the aristocracy of the time. He dared to suggest that true nobility came from virtue, not birth. Imagine dropping that bombshell at a dinner party in a room full of entitled nobles. It was like telling a room of cats that the real power lay with the mice. Confucius was essentially proposing a meritocracy of ethics, a radical idea in a society where nepotism and birthright were the order of the day. And then there was Confucius' take on governance. If you thought his ideas on filial piety and the junzi were bold, his views on leadership were downright revolutionary. He envisioned rulers who led by moral example, not by fear. This wasn't just pie-in-the-sky idealism. Confucius argued that a ruler who governed with virtue would naturally attract the loyalty and respect of the people, much like the North Star guiding sailors through treacherous seas. It was a principle that stood in stark contrast to the prevailing whip and chain method of governance. Confucius also had a few things to say about how rulers should interact with their subjects. He believed in the power of Ren, often translated as humaneness or benevolence. According to him, a ruler imbued with Ren would foster a society where compassion and empathy reigned supreme. It was a far cry from the Machiavellian tactics favored by many of the era's power players. Confucius was playing the long game, betting on the power of kindness in a world that seemed to prefer the short-term gains of ruthlessness. Of course, all these ideas didn't exactly go unchallenged. Confucius had his fair share of critics and skeptics, individuals who probably thought that his idealism was as practical as a chocolate teapot. But Confucius was nothing if not quick-witted and sharp-tongued. One tale has him debating with a local official who questioned the practicality of virtue in leadership. Confucius, with his trademark blend of wit and wisdom, retorted that governing without virtue was like trying to steer a ship without a compass, a sure recipe for disaster. Then there's the story of Confucius sparring with a student over the nuances of filial piety. The student, perhaps feeling cheeky, questioned why such reverence was necessary when parents weren't perfect. Confucius, unruffled, replied that filial piety wasn't about blind obedience, but about understanding and respect, even in the face of imperfection. It was a subtle reminder that while ideals were important, so was a healthy dose of realism. Confucius' teachings might have seemed like pie-in-the-sky fantasies to some, but they struck a chord with many who were weary of the instability and chaos of the times. His ideas were like a breath of fresh air, in a room filled with the stench of corruption and power struggles. They offered a blueprint for a society that valued integrity over intrigue, compassion over coercion, a radical departure from the norm. The appeal of Confucius' philosophies lay in their simplicity and universality. They weren't just rules for rulers or elites, but principles that everyone could aspire to. In a world where social mobility was about as likely as a snowstorm in July, Confucius offered a path to self-improvement that was accessible to all. His teachings were like a light in the darkness, guiding those who sought a better way, a more meaningful existence. And yet, for all the wisdom and idealism, Confucius was acutely aware of the gap between theory and practice. He knew that implementing his ideas was like trying to carve a statue out of the wind, an endeavor that required patience, skill, and a fair bit of luck. But Confucius wasn't deterred. He planted the seeds of his philosophy, knowing full well that they might not bear fruit in his lifetime. As we wrap up this part of Confucius' saga, it's clear that his teachings were more than just philosophical musings. They were a call to action, a challenge to the status quo, and a testament to the power of ideas. Confucius wasn't just a sage dispensing wisdom from a mountaintop. He was a revolutionary thinker daring to dream of a better world. And while he didn't have all the answers, he certainly knew how to ask the right questions. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the layers of Confucius' legacy, exploring how his ideas were received, adapted, and sometimes distorted in the centuries to follow. There's plenty more to discover in the extraordinary life of this remarkable philosopher, whose impact echoes through the annals of history like a timeless melody. As we journey further into the life of Confucius, imagine him back in Lu, a man whose ideas were as persistent as a pop song you can't shake. Confucius had returned not with fanfare, but with the quiet determination of someone who knew he was onto something, even if the world hadn't quite caught up yet. His final years in Lu weren't about resting on laurels or basking in the glow of his philosophical musings. Instead, they were a time of reflection, teaching, and yes, a fair bit of frustration. Let's set the scene. The year is 484 BCE, and Confucius was in his 60s, a ripe old age in an era where life expectancy was often cut short by war, disease, or the occasional disgruntled warlord. But this was no retirement. Confucius was still actively teaching, gathering disciples, as if he were on a mission to create the world's first philosophical army. Among these followers were names like Zilu, Yan Hui, and Zhengzi, individuals who would go on to play key roles in preserving and spreading his teachings. Now, Confucius' disciples weren't just a group of note-takers. Think of them as the original band of philosophical roadies. They were charged with the weighty task of compiling his thoughts and sayings into what we now know as the Analects. This wasn't a mere clerical exercise. It was more like trying to bottle lightning. The Analects would eventually become the Bible of Confucian thought, a collection of pithy sayings and profound insights that have puzzled, inspired, and occasionally baffled readers for centuries. The process of compiling the Analects was about as straightforward as herding cats. With Confucius gone, each disciple had their interpretations, their biases, and their memories of what the master had said. This wasn't just a case of playing telephone with philosophy. It was an exercise in capturing the essence of a man who was part sage, part stand-up comedian. The result was a text as rich in wisdom as it was in wit, a testament to Confucius' ability to distill timeless truths into bite-sized nuggets of wisdom. While the disciples were busy compiling, Confucius himself was grappling with the slow uptake of his ideas. Despite Lu being his home turf, acceptance was tepid at best. It was like trying to sell ice cream in the Arctic. His ideas were seen as noble, but not exactly practical. Yet, Confucius persisted, driven by the belief that even if the seeds he planted didn't sprout in his lifetime, they might one day bloom in the generations that followed. Confucius' later years also saw him wrestling with myths and misconceptions. For starters, the image of Confucius as a serene sage meditating under a tree is as misleading as thinking the Great Wall was built overnight. In reality, he was more of a philosophical rebel, challenging the status quo with the tenacity of a bulldog. He understood that change was a slow, often painful process, and that sometimes it required a good dose of patience and perseverance. His death in 479 BCE at the age of 72 marked the end of an era, but not of his influence. Unlike the dramatic demises of some historical figures, Confucius' passing was relatively peaceful, devoid of the theatrics that often accompany the end of a great life. His funeral was attended by his disciples, who mourned the loss of a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. Yet, this was not the end, but merely the beginning of his legacy. The real magic happened posthumously, as Confucius' ideas began to spread across China like a particularly stubborn philosophical meme. Think of it as the ancient world's version of going viral, but without the aid of social media. His teachings started gaining traction, particularly during the Han Dynasty, which came to power around 206 BCE. The Han emperors, in their quest for stability and order, found in Confucianism a ready-made framework for governance, a set of principles that emphasized hierarchy, duty, and moral integrity. The Han emperors were like the ultimate brand ambassadors for Confucianism, elevating his teachings to the status of state philosophy. It was during this time that Confucius was transformed from a respected scholar into a cultural icon, a symbol of wisdom and virtue. His ideas were incorporated into the civil service exams, essentially making Confucian thought the key to a successful bureaucratic career. If you wanted to climb the political ladder, you had better have your analects well memorized. But as with any good story, there were myths and misconceptions that arose over time. One popular myth was that Confucius had magical powers or divine insights, a narrative that would have likely made the practical philosopher roll his eyes. Confucius wasn't about mysticism. He was about ethics, governance, and the human condition. The myths may have added a layer of allure, but they often overshadowed the simplicity and practicality of his teachings. The spread of Confucianism was not without its challenges. There were debates, reinterpretations, and even distortions of his teachings. Confucius' ideas were adapted to fit various political agendas, sometimes twisted to justify actions that would have made the original master Kang cringe. Yet, the core of his philosophy, a commitment to virtue, respect, and the importance of education, remained intact, a beacon of hope in a tumultuous world. Confucius' legacy is a testament to the power of ideas that transcend time and place. His teachings have been compared to a well-crafted piece of music, simple yet profound, easy to understand yet difficult to master. They continue to resonate, offering insights into leadership, morality, and the human experience. In a world that often seems as chaotic as the spring and autumn period he lived through, Confucius' wisdom remains as relevant as ever. As we wrap up this chapter of Confucius' life, it's clear that his impact was not confined to his own time. His teachings have endured the test of centuries, shaping not just the fabric of Chinese society, but influencing cultures across the globe. Confucius may have been a man of his time, but his ideas are timeless, a reminder that the quest for knowledge and virtue is an endless journey. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the ripple effects of his philosophy and the enduring legacy of a man who dared to dream of a better world. Confucius's legacy didn't just stick around like a persistent cologne. It practically rewrote the cultural playbook in China and beyond. The civil service exams, a grueling marathon of mental gymnastics that would make modern SATs look like a warm-up, became the gold standard for selecting bureaucrats during the Han Dynasty. This wasn't just about testing your ability to regurgitate Confucian quotes. It was about ensuring that the people governing empires had a moral compass set to true north. If you could navigate the analects, you could presumably navigate the complexities of running a country, or so the theory went. Now, these exams weren't child's play. Picture this. Candidates locked in tiny rooms for days, scribbling answers with the desperation of someone trying to remember the cheat codes for life. Only 1 or 2% of candidates passed, the equivalent of getting into a top Ivy League school today. The exams tested not just rote memory, but understanding and interpretation, ensuring that Confucius's teachings weren't just learned, they were lived. This system, which relied heavily on Confucian principles, lasted for over 300 years, influencing governance across East Asia. It's like if the SATs decided the fate of the free world for a millennium. Confucius's influence wasn't limited to bureaucracy. His ideas seeped into the very fabric of education, transforming it from a privilege of the elite to a pursuit open to anyone willing to put in the effort. Confucianism posited that education was a lifelong journey, a climb up a mountain where the summit was never quite in sight. This belief in continuous learning set the stage for educational philosophies around the world, echoing in modern ideas about personal development and the democratization of knowledge. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and Confucius's teachings were making waves far beyond the rice paddies and silk roads of China. In Japan, Korea, and Vietnam, Confucianism became the philosophical backbone of society, shaping everything from family structure to governmental hierarchy. It was like Confucius had set off a philosophical chain reaction, one that would ripple through cultures and centuries. His ideas on respect, duty, and moral leadership became universal values, transcending borders faster than a celebrity scandal on Twitter. But let's not kid ourselves. Confucius's rise to posthumous fame wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. His teachings were often co-opted and twisted by those hungry for power. During the Song dynasty, Neo-Confucianism emerged, blending Confucius's original ideas with metaphysical musings. This wasn't just a remix. It was a philosophical makeover, complete with new tracks that Confucius might not have recognized. While some saw it as an evolution, others viewed it as a departure from the grassroots practicality of Confucius's work, a bit like turning a rock anthem into elevator music. In modern times, Confucianism has been both revered and reviled. During the 20th century, China saw radical shifts, from the fall of the Qing dynasty to the Cultural Revolution. Confucius's ideas were at times embraced as a symbol of cultural heritage, and at others rejected as relics of an outdated feudal past. Mao Zedong famously criticized Confucius, associating him with the old order he sought to dismantle. Yet, even in the face of such opposition, the core of Confucian thought, emphasizing respect, ethics, and education, proved resilient, re-emerging like a philosophical phoenix in recent years. Today, Confucius is a brand, literally. The Confucius Institutes, established in 2004, promote Chinese language and culture across the globe, echoing the sage's belief in the power of education. These institutes are like cultural embassies, spreading not just language skills, but also a touch of Confucian wisdom. It's a testament to the enduring relevance of his ideas, a reminder that while the world has changed, the quest for knowledge and morality remains as vital as ever. Confucius's teachings also pop up in contemporary life in some unexpected ways. Consider the modern corporate world, where his ideals of ethical leadership and integrity have found a surprising audience. In an age of cutthroat competition and corporate scandals, Confucius's emphasis on moral leadership is as pertinent as ever. Think of him as the original consultant, advising on how to lead not through fear, but through respect and example, a lesson some CEOs might want to revisit. In education, Confucius's influence is equally profound. The concept of lifelong learning, popularized in recent decades, echoes Confucius's belief that education is an endless journey. His ideas resonate in discussions about the importance of character education and the role of teachers as moral guides. Confucius would likely nod in approval at modern pedagogical models that emphasize critical thinking and ethical reasoning over rote memorization. As we reflect on the balance between the myth and the man, it's clear that Confucius's legacy is a tapestry woven with both historical reality and romantic narrative. The image of the wise sage, calm and collected, offers a comforting archetype in a world often fraught with chaos. But behind the myth lies a man who grappled with the complexities of human nature, who understood that ideals are often at odds with reality. Confucius's greatness lies not in his perfection, but in his humanity, in his ability to dream of a better world while acknowledging its imperfections. In today's fast-paced, interconnected world, Confucius remains relevant because his ideas speak to the timeless aspects of the human condition. His teachings remind us that while technology may change, the fundamental questions of existence, how to live, how to lead, how to learn, remain constant. Confucius offers no easy answers, but he provides a framework, a guiding light in the often tumultuous journey of life. So, as we wrap up this journey through the life and legacy of Confucius, remember that his story is not just a historical narrative, but a living dialogue. It's a conversation that spans centuries, inviting each generation to engage, interpret, and perhaps even challenge the wisdom of the past. Confucius's teachings are a call to action, a reminder that the pursuit of virtue and knowledge is never truly complete. They are, in essence, an invitation to think, to question, and to strive for a world that aligns a little more closely with the ideals we cherish. Confucius may have walked the earth over 2 millennia ago, but his footprints are still visible today. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of ideas, a reminder that even in the relentless march of time, the search for wisdom remains one of humanity's most noble pursuits. And as we close the book on this chapter of history, let us carry forward the spirit of inquiry and reflection that Confucius championed, continuing the dialogue he began so long ago. Staring up at the great stone walls of your lord's manor, and let me tell you, the only thing more intimidating than their height is your new job title, Falconer's Apprentice. Sounds fancy, right? But before you start picturing yourself as the next medieval rock star of the skies, let's break down why this gig might not be all it's cracked up to be. First off, welcome to the 12th century, where the social ladder is more like a slippery pole greased with pig fat. You're at the bottom, my friend. In the grand scheme of things, you're just a rung above the peasants who till the fields, but way below the knights, lords, and certainly the king himself. The medieval hierarchy is as rigid as a suit of armor, and just as unforgiving if you try to buck the system. Now, Falconer, it's not just about strutting around with a majestic bird perched on your arm. This is serious business. You see, falconry isn't just a pastime for the wealthy, it's an economic necessity. Hunting with birds of prey provides food for the table and demonstrates power and prestige. In a time when a steady supply of meat isn't guaranteed, falconry can be the difference between a feast and famine. So why does the falconer's apprentice start at the bottom? Well, someone's got to do the dirty work, and that someone is you. You'll be tasked with mucking out the mews, essentially cleaning up bird poop. Falcons might be symbols of nobility, but their digestive systems are anything but regal. It's a dirty job, and you're the lucky medieval janitor. But wait, there's more. Your days are filled with endless hours of training, not just for the birds, but for you, too. You're learning the ropes from a seasoned falconer who probably thinks you're as clueless as a chicken trying to fly. And while it might seem romantic to train a bird of prey, it's a painstaking process that demands patience and precision. You'll need to master the art of making hoods, jesses, and leashes, all while dealing with a bird that would rather be soaring over the countryside than sitting on your calloused hand. And don't get me started on the mythology surrounding falconry. Sure, it's portrayed as the sport of kings and queens, but no one mentions the brutal realities lurking beneath that gilded veneer. The romance of a majestic bird diving from the sky to catch its quarry. That's a rare moment in a sea of monotony and mess. And let's not forget, those falcons can be as temperamental as a medieval lord after a bad day in the jousting lists. Living in the 12th century isn't all jousts and jesters. The crushing weight of the class system means your future is largely predetermined. You're not just learning to handle birds, you're learning your place in a world where social mobility is as rare as a dragon siding. The economic and political structures are designed to keep you in your place. You're a cog in a machine that's been operating for centuries, and stepping out of line isn't just frowned upon, it's dangerous. Let's sprinkle in some numbers to really paint the picture. We're talking about a time when a penny could buy you a loaf of bread, and a skilled craftsman might earn 2 shillings a week. The falconer might be better off than the average serf, but in the grand scheme of things, he's still just a servant to the Lord. You, as an apprentice, are earning even less, if anything at all. Your payment is in experience, and the faint hope that one day you'll be the one holding the leash, not scrubbing the floors. And yet, despite all this, there's something undeniably alluring about the life of a falconer. It's a world filled with tradition, skill, and an unspoken bond between human and bird. The very things that make it harsh and unyielding are what also make it captivating. It's a life where you can feel the weight of history on your shoulders, even as you're weighed down by the muck of the mews. So, while you're elbow deep in filth, cleaning up after a bird who doesn't know your name, remember that you're part of something bigger, a tradition that's woven into the very fabric of medieval society. But don't get too comfortable. The road ahead is long, and the path to becoming a master falconer is fraught with challenges that would make even a seasoned knight think twice. So, pull on your boots, grab your leather gloves, and get ready to dive into the gritty, grimy, glorious world of medieval falconry. Now, before you start fantasizing about high-flying glory, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of what it really means to care for these feathered aristocrats. First off, there's the feeding situation. You might think these birds live on a diet of unicorn tears and fairy dust, but nope. It's meat, raw, bloody, and often still twitching. Feeding a falcon isn't just about tossing it a drumstick and calling it a day. Oh no, you're slicing and dicing haphazardly, trying to make sure that your bird is getting just the right amount of protein and fat to keep it in top hunting condition. You see, falcons are the prima donnas of the bird world. They won't settle for anything less than the best cuts. A balanced diet is crucial because a falcon that's too fat won't fly, too thin, and it lacks the strength to hunt. And here's where the numbers get really interesting. In medieval England, a trained falcon could set you back about £1 sterling, a princely sum when you consider that the average yearly wage for a peasant was a mere 6 shillings. That's like spending a year's salary on a single bird. You can see why these creatures were the Gucci handbags of their day, a status symbol for the elite to flaunt. Meanwhile, you're the one making sure this high-priced bird doesn't keel over from malnutrition or, heaven forbid, refuses to hunt because it's in a bad mood. But feeding is just the start of your avian adventure. Let's talk about diseases. Falcons, much like hypochondriac relatives, seem to attract every ailment under the sun. From frowns, a nasty infection of the mouth, to bumblefoot, which sounds cute but is actually a painful foot condition, your bird could come down with something at any moment. And here's the kicker. While modern vet care involves a trip to the local animal hospital, you're stuck with medieval remedies that are more like witchcraft than science. Think ground herbs, leeches, and a whole lot of prayers. You're not just a bird handler. You're an apothecary, desperately trying to keep your charge alive with whatever means necessary. As an apprentice, you're learning all this under the watchful eye of a master falconer who, let's be honest, probably sees you as more of a liability than an asset. You're the one who has to recognize the early signs of illness, administer treatments, and ensure the falcon's living quarters are as spotless as a noble's dining hall. Because if a bird falls sick on your watch, it's your neck on the line, figuratively and in dark times quite literally. Now, let's zoom out for a second. The practice of falconry is more than just a hobby for the medieval elite. It's a pageant of power. The nobility flaunts their falcons as symbols of dominance, control, and mastery over nature. Picture it, a lord galloping across the meadows, a falcon soaring above, both in search of prey. It's a living tapestry of the social hierarchy, where even the birds of prey know their place. Meanwhile, you're in charge of keeping this delicate display from unraveling at the seams. The apprentice's role, while seemingly menial, is crucial. You're the one up at dawn, ensuring the falcons are ready for the day's hunt, and the last one to bed, checking that every feather is in place. You're the unsung hero, the backstage crew in a grand medieval production. And let's not sugarcoat it. The back-breaking labor, responsibility of life and death, and the lack of personal glory can make you question why anyone would sign up for this. But remember, in a world where your social standing is as fixed as the stars, this apprenticeship is your ticket to a slightly better life. A chance to move up from mucking out the mews to maybe, just maybe, holding the leash yourself one day. In the grand tapestry of medieval society, falconry is a thread that weaves together the elements of class, power, and tradition. It's easy to get lost in the romantic image of a nobleman with a bird on his arm, but for every one of those, there's an apprentice in the shadows, doing the real work. So, as you scrub another perch and prepare another meal, remember that you're part of a legacy that's both glamorous and gritty. The world of medieval falconry is a balancing act between the allure of prestige and the reality of toil, and you're right at the heart of it. Now, if you thought your life as a falconer's apprentice was complicated, just wait until you dive into the tangled web of medieval laws and politics surrounding falconry. The medieval legal system was as clear as mud, and falconry laws were no exception. You see, in those days, not just anyone could waltz into the woods with a falcon perched on their arm. Oh no, the power to own and fly these majestic birds was dictated by a labyrinth of decrees and social hierarchies that make modern bureaucracy look like a cakewalk. Let's start with some royal fanfare, the Royal Forest Laws. These were essentially an exclusive club membership for the elite, with King Henry Roman II of England as the bouncer. These laws dictated who could hunt and where. Spoiler, it wasn't you, dear apprentice. Violating these laws was a big no-no, and poaching a falcon, well, that was practically signing your own death warrant. The punishment, you could lose a hand or even your life, depending on the mood of the judge and the severity of your crime. Speaking of which, did you know that in the 13th century, stealing a falcon could get you hanged? That's right, a bird thief could swing from the gallows faster than you can say, feathered felon. And why such harsh penalties, you ask? Because falcons weren't just pets or hunting aids. They were symbols of power and prestige. Owning a falcon was like having a medieval Rolex, and just as expensive. In fact, a fine falcon could cost as much as a small estate, which explains why the nobility guarded their birds like dragons hoarding gold. But here's where it gets really interesting. Falconry wasn't just about showing off. It was deeply woven into the fabric of medieval diplomacy and warfare, like a hidden thread in a tapestry of intrigue. Think of it as the medieval version of a diplomatic lunch, except instead of chatting over canapes, you were watching birds catch rabbits. Rulers would gift falcons to secure alliances, curry favor, or even as apologies. It was like sending a bouquet with talons. King Frederick Roman II of the Holy Roman Empire was a big fan of using falcons as diplomatic tools. In 1230, he famously sent a batch of these feathered ambassadors to the Sultan of Egypt as a gesture of goodwill. Talk about an icebreaker. And in some cases, falcons were even traded for prisoners of war. Picture this: a nobleman held captive, his freedom secured by a well-trained peregrine. It's a scene straight out of a medieval thriller, and you, as the apprentice, are smack dab in the middle of it all, making sure those birds are ready to perform their diplomatic duties. Now, let's clear up another myth, that falconry was all about leisure. Sure, it sounds like a leisurely stroll through the countryside, bird on glove, soaking up the medieval sun. But the reality was more like a high-stakes game of chess, where every move could tip the balance of power. Falcons were used in warfare to disrupt enemy lines, scout terrain, and even deliver messages. They were the drones of the medieval battlefield, minus the beeping and propellers. Imagine this. You're standing beside a knight who's darning his armor, preparing for battle. Beside him, a falcon with its keen eyes and sharp talons, ready to soar above the chaos and report back on enemy movements. This isn't just sport, it's strategy. And you, as the apprentice, are learning to navigate these treacherous waters, ensuring that every feather is in place and every talon is sharp. The social intricacies didn't stop there. Falconry was a performance of status. The birds themselves were cast members in this grand production. Different species were assigned to different ranks. Only kings could own the majestic gyrfalcon, while a mere squire might have to settle for a kestrel. The social ladder was mirrored in the skies, with each bird representing a rung in the hierarchy. You couldn't just grab a bird and call it your own. You had to earn the right through birth or favor. As an apprentice, you needed to know these rules like the back of your hand, or glove. In this case, misstep, and you'd find yourself in heart water faster than a sparrowhawk on the hunt. So, while you're knee-deep in the daily grind, you're also absorbing the unspoken rules of medieval society. It's a delicate dance of power, politics, and prestige, and you're learning the steps one day at a time. In this world, falconry is far more than a hobby. It's a microcosm of the medieval world itself, a reflection of its complexities and contradictions. It's a brutal reminder that even the most romanticized pastimes have a hard edge, and you, dear apprentice, are caught up in the whirlwind of history, trying to keep your head above water, and your falcons above ground. As you navigate these turbulent waters, remember that the falcon is both your burden and your ticket to a better life. It's a symbol of the power you serve and the power you seek. So keep your eyes sharp, your hands steady, and your wits about you. World of medieval falconry is a treacherous sky, and you're learning to fly, one flap at a time. Now, speaking of learning to fly, let's shift focus from the falcon's wings to the social flight path of a falconer's apprentice. It's a world where camaraderie and rivalry dance an awkward jig, much like a medieval court in full swing. You're not just mucking stalls and feeding birds. You're navigating a social web as delicate and treacherous as the finest silk. Your fellow apprentices, they're not just colleagues. They're your competition, your allies, and your rivals, all rolled into one slightly smelly package. Picture this: a dusty courtyard filled with the clamor of young apprentices, each one of you vying to catch the eye of the master falconer, or, if luck smiles upon you, the Lord himself. There's a pecking order here, and it's as cutthroat as any royal court. But don't let the hierarchy fool you into thinking it's all doom and gloom. Amidst the bickering and one-upmanship, genuine bonds are forged, often over shared hardships and a mutual understanding that you're in this together. It's not all squabbling over who gets to handle the prized gyrfalcon, though. There's a camaraderie born from the shared burden of responsibility, the long hours in the field, and the occasional misadventure, like the time a fellow apprentice mistook a kestrel for a sparrowhawk and wore the bruises to prove it. Mistakes are part of the learning curve, and while they might earn you a cuff around the ear, they also foster a certain esprit de corps. After all, nothing says friendship like laughing at someone else's misfortune. While your fellow apprentices might be your closest allies, your interactions with the nobility paint a different picture. You're in their world, but not of it, a bit like the falcons themselves. The lords and ladies, resplendent in their finery, see you as another cog in their extravagant machine. You're there to ensure their pastimes run smoothly, a background player in their grand drama. But every now and then, the curtain parts, and you catch a glimpse of the world beyond the muse. Take, for instance, the legendary court of Elena of Aquitaine, where falconry was more than a pastime. It was a statement. Elena, a woman of formidable political acumen and a love for all things grand, was known to host elaborate hunting parties. Imagine the scene, nobles and knights, their falcons perched on gloved hands, eager to impress the queen with their skill. And there you are, one of the silent enablers of this spectacle. It's an opportunity to observe the nobility in their natural habitat, and if you play your cards right, you might even catch the eye of someone important. But here's where the stakes get high, the chance for social mobility. While the medieval class system is as rigid as a steel gauntlet, falconry offers a rare loophole. Prove yourself indispensable, and you might just earn a patron's favor. It's not unheard of for an apprentice to rise through the ranks, eventually becoming a master falconer and securing a better life. In the 14th century, a certain Thomas Latham achieved just that, rising from humble beginnings to become the king's falconer. His story is the medieval version of a rags-to-riches tale, one that keeps you hoping as you slog through the daily grind. Yet let's not kid ourselves. Those tales are the exception, not the rule. Most apprentices remain firmly planted in their stations, their dreams of advancement as elusive as a falcon on the wing. The reality is a harsh reminder that while the sky might be the limit for your birds, your own prospects are bound by the earth. Now, let's dive into another aspect of your life as an apprentice, the tapestry of religion and superstition that threads through medieval falconry. The Middle Ages were a time when the line between the spiritual and the mundane was blurrier than a falcon's shadow on a cloudy day. Falconry, steeped in tradition and ritual, was no exception. It wasn't just about skill or prestige. There was a mystical element to it as well. The church, with its pervasive influence, cast its eye upon falconry with a mix of suspicion and fascination. On one hand, falcons were seen as symbols of divine majesty and power, their keen sight and swift flight likened to the all-seeing eye of God. On the other, the church frowned upon the extravagance of the hunt, particularly in times of famine and hardship. Yet, falconry found a curious ally in religious symbolism. Falcons, with their ability to soar high and hunt with precision, were often used in sermons as metaphors for spiritual vigilance. Superstition also played its part. Medieval people were a superstitious lot, and they imbued falconry with an aura of mysticism. From charms and amulets to ward off evil spirits, to rituals meant to ensure a successful hunt, the practice was steeped in the kind of magic that defies modern logic. A falcon refusing to hunt on a particular day could be seen as an omen, while a successful hunt was a sign of divine favor. It's like reading tea leaves, except with more feathers and a higher chance of being pooped on. In this world, your role as an apprentice is not just to learn the practicalities of falconry, but to navigate these layers of belief and tradition. You're learning to balance the tangible with the intangible, the earthly with the ethereal. It's a delicate dance, much like the one your falcon performs in the sky. And let's not forget the influence of fate. In a time when destiny was seen as a force as real as the wind, falconry was thought to be tied to fortune. A falconer's success, or lack thereof, was often attributed to fate's whims. This belief in destiny was both a comfort and a curse, absolving you of responsibility when things went wrong, but also keeping you tethered to the idea that your lot in life was preordained. So, as you stand there, falcon perched on your arm, remember that you're not just a keeper of birds. You're a participant in a grand tradition, a living link in a chain that stretches back through time. You're learning not only the skills of the trade, but also the stories and superstitions that give it depth and character. It's a life of contradictions and challenges, where the mundane and the mystical collide in a whirlwind of feathers and fate. In this tangled web of medieval society, you, dear apprentice, are learning that falconry is more than just a job. It's a reflection of the world you inhabit, with all its complexities and contradictions. You're navigating a landscape where power and tradition intersect, where superstition and skill go hand in hand. It's a world that offers glimpses of glory, but demands a price paid in sweat and toil. So, keep your eyes sharp, your wits sharper, and remember, the sky might be the limit for your feathered charges, but your own journey is just beginning. Stay the course, and who knows, you might just find that the path of a falconer's apprentice, though fraught with challenges, is also rich with possibility. As you stand on the precipice of a new day, falcon perched on your arm and the chill of the morning air biting at your cheeks, it's time to take a step back and consider the bigger picture. Falconry, though seemingly a quaint relic of medieval life, was more than a pastime for the nobility. It was a microcosm of the era's social and economic dynamics, a practice that shaped and was shaped by the world around it. First, let's talk legacy. Falconry wasn't just some medieval quirk that petered out with the advent of modernity. Nope, like the best historical practices, it adapted, evolved, and left a lasting impression. Today, falconry is alive and well, with practitioners across the globe keeping the tradition airborne. Yet, what we often forget is how this ancient art reflects a fascinating intersection of nature, power, and human ingenuity. Back in the day, falconry was a symbol of status and skill, a lavish display of dominance over nature. In medieval Europe, owning a falcon was akin to flashing a gold-plated iPhone. It screamed wealth and influence, but let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was that falconry required grueling labor, meticulous attention to detail, and a hefty purse. Remember those falcons priced like small estates? Yeah, the medieval 1% didn't just flaunt their wealth, they invested it in talons and feathers. But falconry wasn't merely a rich man's game. It was deeply embedded in the socio-political tapestry of the time. For instance, in 1241, Emperor Frederick Roman II of the Holy Roman Empire penned De Art Venandi cum Avibus, a comprehensive treatise on falconry. This wasn't just a manual. It was a statement, an assertion of intellectual prowess, and a declaration of his empire's cultural sophistication. Fast forward to today, and falconry continues to be perceived as a noble pursuit. Modern falconers, whether in the deserts of the Middle East or the forests of North America, are drawn by the ancient allure of this art. Yet, contemporary falconry reflects broader societal changes. Environmental awareness now plays a significant role, with conservation and rehabilitation of raptors at the forefront. The once exclusive domain of the elite is now a platform for ecological stewardship. But let's rewind a bit and unpack the myths that still cling to falconry like burrs on a hunting jacket. The romantic image of a solitary falconer, silhouetted against a sunset, bird on glove, is a powerful one. Yet, it glosses over the harsh realities. In medieval times, falconry was fraught with peril, from the dangers of handling wild animals to the ever-present threat of disease. And don't forget the social minefield of medieval politics. The wrong move could see your prized bird clipped and caged, both literally and metaphorically. So why does this romanticized view persist? Human nature, my friend. We love a good story, especially one that pits humanity against nature, wrapped in the elegance of times past. And falconry, with its blend of danger, skill, and beauty, provides just that, a narrative that transcends time. But the real story, the one woven into the very fabric of history, is far more nuanced. Take a step back and consider the economic implications. Falconry wasn't just a hobby, it was a job creator. From craftsmen making hoods and jesses to the apprentices slogging away in the mews, the falconry industry was a medieval gig economy. And let's not forget the ripple effects. Trade routes bustling with merchants peddling the finest hawking gear, spices, and exotic birds. It was a medieval marketplace where the Lord's whims dictated economic trends. Politically, falconry was a feather in the cap of diplomacy. Kings and emperors swapped falcons as tokens of goodwill, much like state visits today. It was a language of power, a non-verbal dialogue played out in the skies. The practice of gifting falcons was a diplomatic art form, one that transcended borders and bridged cultures. From the courts of Europe, to the sand-swept sultanates of the Middle East. Now, as we reflect on this ancient craft, it's clear that falconry's legacy is a testament to human adaptability. It serves as a reminder that even the most niche roles can hold significance across centuries. Falconry reflects the broader societal shift, from rigid hierarchies to more egalitarian structures, and from exploitation of nature to conservation efforts. In the end, the life of a medieval falconer's apprentice was a microcosm of the era. It was a dance of power and prestige, of hard labor underpinned by a promise of something greater. For you, the apprentice, the skies represented not just a space for birds to fly, but a canvas of opportunity, a chance to rise above the muck and mire. So, as you stand there, with the weight of history on your shoulders and a falcon perched on your arm, remember this. You're part of a tradition that has soared through time, adapting and surviving. Falconry is more than just a relic of the past. It's a living legacy, a testament to the enduring human spirit. And in its story, we find echoes of our own, a narrative of struggle, triumph, and the relentless pursuit of something greater. Keep your gaze skyward, for in the vast expanse above lies the promise of a future as boundless as the medieval skies. The Tigris and Euphrates, the dynamic duo of rivers, didn't just water the Sumerian city-states, they practically breathed life into them. These rivers, snaking through what we now call southern Iraq, were the original influencers, attracting humans like moths to a flame with their promise of fertile land. Around 4000 BCE, a time when the wheel was still the latest tech gadget, the Sumerians decided that all this water wasn't just for splashing around. They figured out that you could actually grow stuff with it. Revolutionary, right? But these early settlers weren't just planting crops and calling it a day. No, they were creating the blueprints for urban living. The Sumerians took a dusty patch of land and said, "Let's make a city." And thus, Uruk was born. Not just your run-of-the-mill village with more huts than you could shake a stick at. Oh no, Uruk was something special. By 3000 BCE, it was the largest city in the world, boasting a population of over 50,000. That's a crowd big enough to fill a modern sports stadium, all living in mud-brick houses, with ziggurats towering over them like ancient skyscrapers. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the ziggurat in the city. Were these Sumerian city-states truly bustling metropolises, or just small towns with ambitions bigger than their borders? Sure, they had walls, temples, and enough drama to fuel 100 soap operas, but was that enough to qualify them as full-fledged cities? Ancient cities were like the Wild West of urban development. They had a flair for the dramatic, but often lacked the infrastructure to support their lofty aspirations. The Sumerians didn't have Wi-Fi, but they did have the next best thing, irrigation. They engineered an intricate network of canals and ditches that made the desert bloom. It was a game-changer, transforming the region into a breadbasket. This agricultural prowess didn't just feed the masses, it fueled trade and economic development. They grew barley, dates, and flax, among others, turning these into lucrative commodities. Trade routes sprung up like weeds, and pretty soon Sumerians were swapping goods with their neighbors, from Anatolia to the Indus Valley. But let's not get too romantic. Life in the Sumerian city-states wasn't all about trading goods and writing cuneiform love letters. It was hard work, with back-breaking labor and a social hierarchy that made sure everyone knew their place. At the top, you had the rulers and priests, living the good life in their palaces and temples. Below them, the merchants and artisans kept the economy buzzing. And at the bottom, the farmers and laborers did the dirty work, quite literally, in the fields and construction sites. The Sumerian kings claimed they were chosen by the gods, which, as you can imagine, made them quite popular at parties. But their divine mandate didn't just grant them power. It also came with responsibilities, like maintaining those all-important irrigation systems. Flooding was a constant threat, and if the fields went dry, it wasn't just the crops that suffered. A failed harvest could mean social unrest, or worse, invasion by one of those pesky neighboring city-states. Speaking of neighbors, the Sumerian city-states weren't exactly besties. They were more like siblings locked in a perpetual squabble over territory and resources. Each city-state was its own little kingdom, with its own ruler and patron deity. It was like a divine version of my god's bigger than your god, and it often led to conflict. The city-states banded together when it suited them, usually against a common enemy. But alliances were as stable as a house of cards. And let's not forget about the innovation. The Sumerians were the original inventors, coming up with things that are still part of our lives. Take writing, for instance. They invented cuneiform, a system of wedge-shaped marks that was about as easy to read as a doctor's handwriting. But cuneiform wasn't just for recording grain shipments. It was used for everything from epic poetry to legal codes, giving us a glimpse into their world, warts and all. So, were these Sumerian cities dazzling hubs of civilization, or just glorified villages with better PR? In many ways, they were both. They had the ambition, the innovation, and the infrastructure to rival any modern city. Yet, they were also constrained by their environment and resources, forever teetering on the edge between prosperity and collapse. Despite their limitations, the Sumerians laid down the roots of urban life, roots that would continue to sprout and evolve throughout history. And it all started with 2 rivers and a vision of turning barren land into bustling cities, proving that sometimes all it takes to change the world is a little water and a lot of determination. And speaking of determination, let's shift our focus to one of the biggest names to ever strut down the ancient Sumerian red carpet, Gilgamesh. Now, if you're imagining a brooding figure with a chiseled jaw and a penchant for epic quests, you're not entirely off. Gilgamesh was the kind of ruler who, if he had lived today, would have his own action movie franchise. But let's peel back the layers of mythology and tackle the man behind the legend. First, a little backstory. Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk around 2700 BCE, and he's the star of one of the earliest works of literary fiction known to humankind, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Think of it as the original blockbuster tale, full of gods, monsters, and a journey to the ends of the earth. The epic paints him as 2/3 god and 1/3 human, which is some impressive genetic math that undoubtedly helped his street cred. But beyond the myths, Gilgamesh was a real king navigating the all-too-real political landscape of Sumer. The city-state of Uruk, remember, wasn't just a sleepy town with a few huts and a temple. It was a bustling hub of activity, filled with artisans, traders, and quite possibly the world's first bureaucrats. And ruling over such a city wasn't a walk in the ziggurat park. Gilgamesh had to keep a lid on internal strife while fending off those pesky neighboring city-states, each with rulers who thought they were the next big thing. A bit like a modern-day political campaign, but with more spears and fewer attack ads. Now, you might think that the key to Gilgamesh's rule lay in his divine heritage or his legendary brawn. But the real ace up his sleeve was something far less glamorous, the legal code. You see, before there were lawmakers, there were law-riders. And in Sumer, those laws were often wrapped up in the kind of divine rhetoric that would make even the most pious politician blush. The first known legal codes, like the Code of Urnam, laid down around 2100 BCE, were a mix of justice, divine mandate, and good old-fashioned fear-mongering. These early laws were inscribed on clay tablets, a sort of ancient post-it note system for keeping the peace. They covered everything from property rights to personal injury, with the occasional divine curse thrown in for good measure. Breaking the law in Sumer wasn't just a matter of paying a fine or doing time. No, it was about avoiding divine wrath, which was a serious motivator. After all, who wants to risk a plague of locusts just because they overcharged for barley? The laws served not just to maintain order, but to reinforce the idea that the king was the divine intermediary. Gilgamesh and his contemporaries wielded this power like a sword, keeping the populace in line with a mix of earthly justice and celestial threats. And while it might sound like a heavy-handed approach, it worked. People were more likely to follow the rules if they believed the consequences were sent straight from the heavens. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the wisdom of ancient rulers. These legal codes were as much about consolidating power as they were about fairness. The rulers of Sumer knew that a unified legal system was a surefire way to keep a grip on their territory. It was like the ultimate power play, one that ensured stability, at least until the next city-state decided to launch an invasion. Speaking of invasions, the rivalry between Sumerian city-states was the stuff of legend. Imagine a game of chess where every piece is a city with its own agenda, and the stakes are land, resources, and prestige. Each city-state had its own patron deity, its own king, and its own ambitions. The result, a constant state of rivalry that could erupt into full-blown conflict at the drop of a clay tablet. These rivalries weren't just about showing off who had the biggest ziggurat or the most lavish temple. They were about survival. In a world where resources were finite and the next bad harvest could spell disaster, control over fertile land and trade routes was everything. The stakes were high, and alliances were as fluid as the Tigris and Euphrates in flood season. Yet, despite the frequent skirmishes and political maneuverings, there was a certain cohesion to the Sumerian city-states. They shared a common culture, language, and pantheon, which meant that even as they fought, they were building a shared identity. It was a bit like a dysfunctional family dinner. Lots of arguments, but in the end, everyone was still part of the same clan. So, while Gilgamesh might be best remembered for his epic quests and divine parentage, his real legacy lay in the political landscape he navigated. It was part of a world where rulers walked a tightrope between myth and reality, where laws were as much about divine authority as they were about justice. And while the Sumerian city-states might have been divided by rivalry, they were united by a shared vision of what it meant to be a part of this ancient civilization. Now, while Gilgamesh was busy juggling his dual role as action hero and legal savant, life in Sumer wasn't all about epic tales and divine decrees. There was a whole economic engine humming beneath those mud brick streets, and it was as intricate as the cuneiform that recorded it. You see, the Sumerians didn't just invent the idea of a city, they practically wrote the manual on how to run one. Let's start with trade networks, because nothing says economic powerhouse like swapping goods with distant lands. Picture this: Sumerian merchants loading up boats with barley and dates, setting sail down the rivers, and then heading out across the vast expanses of the Persian Gulf. Their destinations, the Indus Valley, over 2,000 kilometers away, and Egypt no less. It was a trade route worthy of its own ancient version of Around the World in 80 Days, minus the hot air balloon. Now, this wasn't some casual barter system where you traded a goat for a handful of grain and called it a day. No, the Sumerians were dealing in serious commodities. Copper from Oman, lapis lazuli from what is now Afghanistan, and timber from the distant shores of the Indus were just a few of the items making their way to Sumerian markets. This wasn't just trade, it was the ancient equivalent of a global economy. Sumer was the Wall Street of the ancient world, minus the suits and briefcases. But while the traders were off playing Marco Polo, the real economic action was taking place back home, centered around, you guessed it, the temples. Now, before you start picturing these as serene places of worship, remember this: Sumerian temples were the original megachurches, only with more accounting and fewer choir robes. They were the hubs of economic activity, complete with warehouses, workshops, and a whole host of bureaucrats keeping the gears of commerce well-oiled. The temples owned land, lots of it, and they didn't let it sit idle. They leased it out to farmers, who paid the rent in crops, which the temples then redistributed. Think of it as the earliest form of socialism, with the priests acting as both landlords and benevolent overseers. And speaking of priests, let's tackle the age-old question: were they just a well-dressed tax agency? In a word, yes, but with a twist. These priests weren't just pious individuals reciting hymns. They were businessmen, administrators, and yes, tax collectors, all rolled into one. Their robes might have been ceremonial, but their ledgers were as down-to-earth as a Sumerian farmer's plough. The temples kept meticulous records of transactions, making them the IRS of the ancient world, with a divine twist. But why would anyone hand over their hard-earned grain to a bunch of priests? Because in a world where the next flood could wipe out your entire crop, having the guards, or at least their earthly representatives, on your side was a smart investment. The priests promised divine favor and protection, and in return, you paid your dues. It was a spiritual protection racket, as old as civilization itself. So while the temples might have looked like they were all about incense and offerings, they were actually the economic powerhouses driving Sumerian prosperity. They controlled vast tracts of land and resources, turning them into centers of production and trade. And in doing so, they created a system where religion and economics were as intertwined as the Tigris and Euphrates themselves. In the grand scheme of things, this economic interweaving was about more than just keeping the coffers full. It was about ensuring stability in a world where the only constant was change. The Sumerians understood that prosperity wasn't just a matter of having stuff. It was about managing resources, building networks, and yes, keeping the guards happy. And while they might not have had spreadsheets or stock markets, their economic system was sophisticated enough to rival anything we have today. Of course, no discussion of Sumerian economics would be complete without a nod to their innovations in measurement and record-keeping. After all, you can't run an empire on good intentions alone. The Sumerians invented the concept of a standard measure, using barley as a unit of weight, developed one of the first forms of bookkeeping. Their tablets recorded everything from trade transactions to inventory lists, providing a glimpse into the economic pulse of their society. So, while we might romanticize the Sumerians as mystical builders of ziggurats and scribes of epic tales, the truth is, they were also savvy economists and shrewd administrators. They understood that the key to prosperity lay in the balance between divine favor and earthly resources, and they built an economic system that reflected that balance. As we continue to unravel the threads of Sumerian society, it becomes clear that these ancient city-states were more than just the sum of their parts. They were complex, dynamic systems, driven by a blend of innovation, ambition, and a touch of divine intervention. And while they might have been bound by the constraints of their environment, they proved time and again that with a little ingenuity, even the harshest landscape could be transformed into a thriving civilization. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world of the Sumerians, exploring the social structures, cultural achievements, and technological innovations that made them one of history's most fascinating civilizations. There's more to come, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. And while we're at it, let's turn the spotlight on the cultural fireworks that were the Sumerian city-states, where the arts and sciences did synchronized high dives off the ziggurats. First up, cuneiform writing, a game-changer in the annals of human expression. Imagine a world where the only way to express your undying love was through a series of wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets. Romantic, right? This wasn't just a tool for love letters, though. Cuneiform was the Swiss Army knife of writing systems, etching everything from epic poetry to the day's market transactions into history. Now, about those ziggurats. Think of them as the original skyscrapers, minus the elevators, and with a bit more sun-baked charm. These massive terraced structures weren't just for show. They were architectural statements proclaiming, "Look at us, we've got it all figured out." And what's more, they served as religious and community hubs. The ziggurat of for instance, was higher than a giraffe's daydream and demanded a workforce that could rival the attendance of a modern-day rock concert. Talk about putting your faith on a pedestal. But let's not romanticize the back-breaking labor that went into these constructions. The Sumerians didn't have cranes or power tools, just a lot of grit and determination. Now, onto the literary scene, where the epic of Gilgamesh takes center stage. This wasn't just an ancient bedtime story. It was the blockbuster of its time, complete with a hero who was part god, part human, and all drama. It's like if Hercules had a meet-cute with existential angst. Gilgamesh wrestles with the big questions, life, death, and the pursuit of immortality, while dodging the divine equivalent of paparazzi. But was this epic merely the fever dream of someone with too much time and access to clay tablets? Well, you could say that, but it's also a window into the Sumerian psyche, reflecting their beliefs, fears, and aspirations in a way that resonates even today. It was the ancient version of binge-worthy content, and it's still making waves thousands of years later. But let's talk about an even wilder myth, the idea that Sumerians were in cahoots with space aliens. Now, before your imagination spirals into a galaxy far, far away, let's reel it back to solid ground. The truth is, the Sumerians were as human as you or I, albeit with more clay dust in their hair. The notion of ancient astronauts might make for a compelling sci-fi plot, but it doesn't hold up under historical scrutiny. The Sumerians achieved their impressive feats with hard work, ingenuity, and perhaps a little divine inspiration, not extraterrestrial intervention. Speaking of divine, the Sumerians had a pantheon that could rival a Marvel Universe crossover event. Gods and goddesses like Enlil, Inanna, and Uru played starring roles in their beliefs, influencing everything from the weather to the outcome of battles. These deities weren't just celestial characters. They were woven into the very fabric of Sumerian life, their stories echoing through the temples and streets. The line between myth and reality was as blurry as the Tigris on a foggy morning, which suited the Sumerian rulers just fine. After all, claiming divine favor was a handy way to keep the populace in line and the neighboring city-states at bay. And let's not forget the science. The Sumerians were no slouches when it came to technological innovation. They pioneered the use of wheels, not just for carts, but for a host of other inventions that would change the world. By 3500 BCE, the potter's wheel was spinning its way into every artisan's workshop, revolutionizing the production of pottery. And speaking of revolutions, let's give a nod to Sumerian astronomy. These ancient stargazers mapped the heavens with the precision of a modern-day GPS, tracking celestial events with an eye on both the divine and the practical. Their lunar calendar, based on the cycles of the moon, helped them manage everything from harvests to holy days, proving that the sky wasn't just the limit, it was the roadmap. In the realm of mathematics, the Sumerians were the original number crunchers. They devised a base 60 system, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. It might seem arbitrary, but it made calculations easier for trade and engineering, much like how we still grapple with the metric system today. These numerical innovations were inscribed on clay tablets, the ancient equivalent of spreadsheets, providing a glimpse into the Sumerian mind at work. So, were the Sumerians the extraterrestrial masterminds of ancient legend, or just a bunch of savvy humans making the most of their environment? The evidence points to the latter, with a splash of divine inspiration and a whole lot of elbow grease. They took the challenges of their world and turned them into opportunities, laying the groundwork for future civilizations to build upon. As we ponder this tapestry of achievements, it's clear that the Sumerians were more than just a footnote in history. They were trailblazers, innovators, and storytellers, leaving an indelible mark on the world. Their legacy is etched in clay and stone, a testament to the enduring power of human creativity and ambition. And as we continue to unravel the mysteries of their civilization, one thing becomes abundantly clear. The Sumerians were a force to be reckoned with, not just in their own time, but for centuries to come. But hold onto your cuneiform tablets. There's still more to explore in the ancient land of Sumer. Next, we'll dive into the social structures that held these city-states together, the technological marvels that propelled them forward, and the lessons they left for future generations. The story of Sumer is far from over, and it's a saga that's still unfolding in the dusty pages of history. So, stay tuned as we continue to unravel the rich tapestry of Sumerian life, with all its triumphs, trials, and timeless tales. The sun had barely set on the thriving Sumerian city-states when the winds of change began to blow through the Fertile Crescent like an unwelcome guest at a dinner party. What was once a bustling hub of innovation and trade started showing cracks, not in their mud-brick ziggurats, but in the very foundations of their society. Decline of the Sumerian city-states was a slow burn, a cautionary tale written in the sands of time, with environmental challenges and pesky invaders playing lead roles in this historical drama. First, let's talk climate, a topic that was as much a conversation starter than as it is at today's water coolers. Around 2100 BCE, the Sumerians were hit with a climate curveball that would make even the most seasoned meteorologists scratch their head. A prolonged drought swept through the region, turning the once verdant fields into dust bowls. This wasn't just a bad year for crops, it was a catastrophe. The once dependable Tigris and Euphrates rivers weren't delivering the watery goods like they used to, and without water, those carefully engineered irrigation systems were about as useful as a chocolate teapot. The economic repercussions were as predictable as they were devastating. Fewer crops meant less food, and less food meant hangry citizens, not exactly the recipe for a stable society. Suddenly, the temples, which had been the economic powerhouses, found their ledgers looking a bit thin, and the priests were left praying for rain rather than counting the barley. The social contract was breaking down, and when the gods seemed to be giving you the silent treatment, it's easy to see how faith could falter. Enter stage left, the invaders. While the Sumerians were busy trying to coax life from their parched lands, the neighboring Akkadians, Amorites, and eventually the Elamites saw an opportunity. Picture a band of marauding warriors with a lust for conquest and a taste for Fertile Crescent real estate. The Sumerians, weakened by famine and internal strife, were ripe for the picking. In 2004 BCE, the city of Ur finally fell to the Elamites, marking the end of Sumerian dominance. It was the ancient equivalent of a hostile takeover, only with more swords and less paperwork. Yet, in the grand tapestry of history, the Sumerians were more than just a civilization that got clobbered by climate and conquest. Their legacy lived on, like a catchy tune you can't get out of your head. The Akkadians, who were initially the adversaries, ended up borrowing heavily from Sumerian culture, language, religion, and all. Talk about cultural appropriation with a twist. The famous Code of Hammurabi owes a nod to those early Sumerian legal codes, proving that good laws, like good stories, have a way of sticking around. And speaking of stories, the Epic of Gilgamesh didn't just fade away with the fall of Ur. It found new life in the libraries of Babylon and beyond, a testament to its timeless themes of human ambition and mortality. In fact, Gilgamesh's adventures have been translated into more languages than the ancient Sumerians could have counted on their cuneiform tablets. In a world where stories have the power to transcend time and space, Gilgamesh remains a hero for the ages. Now, if you're thinking the Sumerians were all about grand gestures and not so grand endings, remember this. Their contributions to civilization were the equivalent of a starter pack for the ancient world. They laid the groundwork for urban planning, law, and even the arts. The wheel, cuneiform, and the potter's wheel were their brainchildren, and these innovations would roll on into the future, shaping societies for millennia. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. The Sumerians were also human, prone to the same mistakes that echo through history: political infighting, over-reliance on environmental resources, and a tendency to think that the gods would always have their backs. Their story is a reminder that even the most advanced societies can falter when hubris and nature collide, a lesson that feels all too relevant today. In the end, the decline of the Sumerian city-states was not just a fall from grace, but a transition into something greater. Their legacy is a testament to the resilience of human creativity and the enduring power of ideas. From the ashes of Ur and Uruk rose new civilizations that would carry the torch of innovation, proving that while empires may crumble, the seeds of knowledge they plant can grow into mighty oaks. So, as we lay the Sumerians to rest in the annals of history, let's not forget the lessons they left behind. Their story is one of ambition and folly, of triumph and defeat, and of the indomitable human spirit that refuses to be silenced by the sands of time. It's a legacy that reminds us that while the past may be a foreign country, its echoes still resonate in our modern world. And as we continue to uncover the mysteries of our ancient ancestors, one thing is clear. History isn't just about what happened, it's about what happens next. So, you're an 11-year-old in ancient Egypt, and your parents have just decided you're going to be a scribe. Congratulations! You've just been handed the ancient version of the golden ticket, except instead of a chocolate factory, your prize is a life filled with back-breaking work, relentless memorization, and a few papyrus cuts. Sounds glamorous, right? Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of why being a scribe was both a privilege and a punishment. First things first, you need to understand that becoming a scribe is like winning the Egyptian lottery. Out of the entire population, only about 1% knew how to read and write. That's right, 1%. So, while your pals are out in the fields getting sunburned and harvesting grain, you're indoors, hunched over a reed mat, trying to memorize over 700 hieroglyphs. And you thought learning the alphabet was hard. But hey, at least you won't have to deal with Nile crocodiles on your commute to work. Your training starts young, and it's no walk along the Nile. You begin as an apprentice, which is a fancy word for kid who runs errands and cleans up ink spills. Your mentor, a seasoned scribe who probably has a permanent ink stain on his thumb, will drill those symbols into your brain until you see them in your sleep. We're talking about a grueling routine that starts early in the morning and wraps up when the sun sets over the pyramids. You might be thinking, why 700 symbols? Can't we just simplify this a bit? Well, friend, each of those hieroglyphs represents not just letters, but also whole words and sounds. It's like learning a mix of the alphabet and emojis with a dash of artistic flair. And let's be honest, some of these symbols are downright bizarre. For example, there's one that looks suspiciously like a loaf of bread. Try explaining that one to your friends who are wrestling with oxen. Now, let's talk papyrus. You can't be a scribe without your trusty roll of papyrus, which is basically ancient paper made from reeds. But here's the catch. Papyrus is expensive. We're not talking a couple of coins. A single sheet could cost as much as a day's wages for a laborer. So, if you mess up, you're not just making a mistake. You're wasting what could have been someone's dinner. No pressure, right? But why go through all this trouble? Because literacy is your VIP pass to the upper echelons of society. In a world where the vast majority of people couldn't even spell their own names, being able to write made you a rock star. You'd be rubbing shoulders with the elite, crafting official documents, and maybe even penning a few love letters for the pharaoh himself. Literacy was power, my friend, and as a scribe, you wielded it like a boss. Let's not forget the practical perks. As a scribe, you had a pretty sweet setup compared to most. While others were busy hauling stones or ploughing fields, you got to work indoors, away from the blazing sun. Sure, you might develop a bit of a hunchback from all that riding, but that's a small price to pay for avoiding farmers' tan and back-breaking labor. But hold on, let's bust a myth before we get too carried away with the romance of it all. Being a scribe wasn't all about penning poetry and crafting odes to the gods. You were essentially an ancient bureaucrat dealing with the paperwork of the ancient world. Think less Shakespeare, more spreadsheets. In fact, a lot of your work involved keeping detailed records of crops, taxes, and transactions. It's not exactly the stuff of epic tales, but somebody had to do it, and that somebody was you. And let's talk about the politics of it all. In ancient Egypt, being a scribe meant you had a direct line to the powers that be. You weren't just recording history, you were shaping it. Your words could influence decisions, document treaties, and even affect trade relations. That kind of influence was rare and powerful, a double-edged reed pen, if you will. So, as you sit there with ink-stained fingers and eyes glazed over from staring at tiny symbols all day, remember this. You're not just a kid with a brush and some papyrus. You're a gatekeeper of knowledge, a chronicler of your time, and a vital cog in the grand machine of ancient Egyptian civilization. And while it may not always feel like it, you're part of a legacy that will be studied and admired thousands of years from now. Not too shabby for a kid with a reed pen, huh? And yet, with all this prestige, you're still stuck in the daily grind, my friend. Picture yourself in a cramped, dimly lit scriptoria, surrounded by other scribes, each hunched over scrolls like vultures over a desert carcass. The air is thick with dust, and the smell of ink, your constant companions. Your job, to copy text after text, document after document, until your eyes blur and your hand cramps. Glamorous, right? Welcome to the real world of ancient Egyptian scribes, where monotony is your middle name. Let's break it down. Your day starts at the crack of dawn, because the sun doesn't wait for anyone, not even scribes. Your tools are simple: reeds, ink made from soot and gum, and papyrus. And if you're thinking, surely there's a better way, remember that ancient Egypt wasn't exactly Silicon Valley. Innovations in writing tools weren't high on the pharaoh's to-do list. The work is repetitive, no doubt about it. Copying the same text over and over isn't exactly a creative outlet. It's like being stuck in a never-ending loop of ancient Egyptian Excel spreadsheets. Except instead of formulas, you're dealing with hieroglyphs. And let's talk about errors. Make a mistake, and you can't just hit backspace. No, you have to start over on a new sheet of papyrus, and we've already discussed how costly that stuff is. Each mistake is like watching coins slip through your fingers, or worse, dinner slipping off your plate. But why all this focus on copying? Because, dear listener, in a society where most folks couldn't even doodle their names in the sand, the written word was a big deal. Every legal document, tax record, or religious text had to be meticulously recorded and preserved. You weren't just writing for the present, you were inscribing eternity. And that's where the economic importance of scribes comes in. Your work was the backbone of bureaucracy and commerce. Without you, the whole operation might as well be a sandcastle waiting for high tide. Yet here's the kicker. Despite the critical nature of your work, scribes weren't exactly showered with gold and silver. Sure, you were more comfortable than a farmer or laborer, but let's not kid ourselves. You weren't rolling in riches. Your compensation was often in the form of rations and the occasional favor from someone higher up. In economic terms, you were essential yet economically undervalued, like the ancient world's version of a schoolteacher. Why this paradox? Well, the power dynamics in Egypt were as complex as a knot in a pharaoh's wig. While scribes were literate and held positions of influence, they were still part of a rigid hierarchy. The real power was concentrated at the top, with the pharaoh and his inner circle. Scribes were vital cogs in the machine, but they weren't the ones pulling the levers. It's a classic case of brains versus brawn, with a splash of bureaucracy for good measure. And let's not forget the social factor. Being a scribe meant you were educated, but education didn't necessarily translate to social clout. You mingled with the elite, sure, but you weren't exactly invited to their dinner parties. You were the indispensable outsider, respected but not quite embraced. It's like being the IT guy at a corporate party. Everyone needs you, but no one really knows what to do with you once the problem's fixed. So, as you sit there, surrounded by ink-stained peers, take a moment to reflect on the reality of your situation. You're part of an elite group, yes, but you're also a cog in a grand machine that often doesn't appreciate the grease that keeps it running smoothly. It's a tale as old as time. Education and intelligence are prized, yet often taken for granted. You're both the hero and the unsung sidekick, a paradox wrapped in papyrus, with a reed pen as your sword. And while the romance of being a scribe might seem appealing, remember that romantic notions often gloss over the gritty details. You're not just writing history, you're surviving it. And that, my friend, is both your burden and your legacy. And speaking of surviving history, let's dive headfirst into the bureaucratic behemoth that was ancient Egypt's administration, a system with more layers than a pharaoh's burial shroud. Now, as a budding scribe, you might think you're the star of the show, but let's be real. You're more like the understudy who never quite gets the spotlight. Sure, you're educated and literate, but in the grand pyramid scheme, you're just one of many cogs keeping the gears of government turning. Imagine a colossal machine with thousands of moving parts, each playing its part to keep the state running smoothly. That's where you come in, and believe me, it's less glamorous than it sounds. Your typical day might start with a task that sounds deceptively simple, tax collection. But in ancient Egypt, tax collecting was an intricate dance, not a straightforward march. You weren't just jotting down numbers. You were part of a vast network ensuring that the right amount of grain, livestock, or labor made its way back to the state coffers. Picture this. Every grain collected represented not just sustenance, but power. It was the currency of the realm, and keeping tabs on who owed what required precision, patience, and a strong stomach for bureaucracy. Here's the catch, though. As a scribe, you were tasked with recording these transactions, not deciding them. That was left to the higher-ups, the viziers and noblemen who sat comfortably atop the social ladder. You, meanwhile, were elbow-deep in papyrus and ink, ensuring that the wheels of commerce and governance kept turning. It's like being the technician behind the scenes of a grand theater production, essential but unseen. Without your meticulous record-keeping, the whole show would grind to a halt. Now, let's address the myth of scribes as ancient power players. Sure, you had access to pharaohs and high-ranking officials, but let's not get carried away with delusions of grandeur. Your role was more akin to a trusted clerk than a kingmaker. You were the one making sure that Teddy's 3 goats didn't miraculously transform into 5 by the time they reached the treasury's records. Your influence was wielded through ink and parchment, not through political maneuvering. In truth, the real power lay with those you served. The pharaoh and his inner circle were the true puppeteers, pulling strings you couldn't even see. You might have been the pen that recorded their decrees, but you weren't the hand that directed policy. It's a classic case of the pen is mightier than the sword, except when the sword is wielded by someone with a crown. Your political power was more a reflection of the authority above you than your own. Of course, that's not to say being a scribe was without its perks. You had access to the inner sanctums of power, a privilege that few could claim. While the average farmer was lucky to catch a glimpse of the pharaoh during a festival parade, you were privy to the inner workings of the kingdom. This proximity to power offered an intoxicating allure, a tantalizing taste of the upper echelons of society, a bit like being a backstage pass holder to the greatest show in Egypt. Yet here's the stark reality. No matter how close you got, there was always a line you couldn't cross. You might rub shoulders with the elite, but when the papyrus chips were down, you were reminded of your place in the hierarchy. Like a supporting actor in a blockbuster epic, you played your part, but the credits always rolled with someone else's name in lights. And while we're busting myths, let's talk about the social dynamics at play. The idea that scribes were the intellectual elite might be true, but it came with its own set of challenges. You were educated, yes, but education didn't necessarily translate to social cachet. You were respected for your skills, yet often found yourself straddling 2 worlds, the learned upper class and the labor-driven lower class, without fully belonging to either. It's a bit like being the smart kid in a school full of jocks. You're appreciated for your talents, but you're not always invited to the parties. Despite your essential role in the state machinery, the rewards were often meager. Your compensation might include rations of barley and beer, maybe a plot of land if you were lucky. Not exactly a king's ransom, but it kept you fed and clothed. In economic terms, you were indispensable but hardly affluent. Think of it as being the ancient equivalent of a civil servant, necessary for the functioning of society, yet often underappreciated and underpaid. Yet, despite the grind and the lack of riches, being a scribe had its own kind of prestige. You were a guardian of knowledge, a preserver of history. Your records weren't just numbers and names. They were the threads weaving the tapestry of ancient Egyptian civilization. In that sense, you were part of something far greater than yourself, a living link between the past and the future. So, as you sit there with your reed pen poised over a fresh sheet of papyrus, remember this. You're not just documenting the mundane details of taxes and trade. You're crafting a legacy, one stroke at a time. And while you may not be a power player in the traditional sense, your words and records will shape the narrative of history for generations to come. That, my friend, is the true power of the scribe. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. While the notion of being a scribe might conjure images of scholarly pursuits and intellectual debates, the reality was often far less glamorous. Think endless hours in cramped quarters, surrounded by the relentless hum of fellow scribes, each lost in their own world of ink and hieroglyphs. It's a scene that would make even the most ardent academic wince. And yet, amidst the monotony, there was a certain rhythm to the work, a cadence that, while repetitive, became a part of the scribe's life. Like the steady flow of the Nile, your days ebbed and flowed with the demands of the state, a constant reminder of the cycle of life and duty. It was a life of quiet dedication, a testament to the importance of the written word in a world where so few could wield it. So, as the sun sets over the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, take a moment to reflect on your place in this ancient world. You may not wield a sword or wear a crown, but your pen holds a power all its own. In the grand tapestry of history, you are the weaver, the chronicler, the unsung hero. And while the world around you may change, your legacy, inscribed in ink and papyrus, will endure. But don't let the flickering candlelight fool you into thinking that being a scribe was all about soulful reflections and philosophical musings. Nope. It turns out the life of a scribe was often as romantic as a tax audit. You see, while tomb art might depict scribes with the serene demeanor of a Zen master, reality was far more gritty. Those paintings and carvings you see, they're basically ancient Instagram filters, idealized snapshots of a life that glossed over the mundane and monotonous bits. The truth is, daily life as a scribe was as much about surviving the grind as it was about preserving knowledge. And let's talk about those romanticized portrayals for a second. In tombs, scribes are often shown nestled among scrolls, looking contemplative, as if they're pondering the mysteries of the universe. But let's be real. They were more likely stressing over correcting a miswritten name in the king's tax records. After all, getting that wrong could mean a stern talking-to from your boss, or worse, a significant pay cut, assuming you were getting more than just barley and beer to begin with. So why the rosy depictions? Well, ancient Egyptians loved a good story, and scribes had a hand in writing theirs. A scribe's status was tied to their literacy, which was rarer than a rainstorm in the desert. Tomb art was a chance to cement their legacy, portraying themselves as literate elites, indispensable to society. It's like how today's social media influencers curate their lives to look glamorous. The reality, though, was often more ink-stained fingers than gilded papyrus. Speaking of status, let's address the elephant, or should I say the sacred ibis, in the room: social mobility. In ancient Egypt, the social ladder was more a step pyramid than a clear upward path. As a scribe, you were perched somewhere in the middle, above the farmers and artisans, but below the priests and nobility. You had better odds of rubbing shoulders with the upper crust than a mud-brick mason, yet the ceiling was pretty low. You were respected for your knowledge and skills, but not necessarily invited to the power lunches of the day, unless they needed someone to record the menu. Interestingly, scribes sometimes found themselves stuck in a socio-economic no-man's land. Their education and literacy afforded them a certain prestige, But these didn't always translate to economic prosperity or social clout. Imagine being the smartest person in the room, yet still needing to ask for a raise. In a society where birth often dictated destiny, scribes were a curious anomaly, educated, yet not quite elite. So, let's dig into some primary sources. The Instructions of Kedi, sort of ancient Egyptian career advice manual, paints the life of a scribe in glowing terms. It claims that scribes were free from manual labor and enjoyed a cushy life. But Kedi's work is essentially ancient propaganda, hyping the scribe's role to attract more young recruits. Picture a modern-day college brochure promising high-paying jobs, only to deliver a mountain of student debt instead. On the flip side, the satire of the trades gives us a more cynical view. It lists professions, from potters to reed cutters, detailing their miseries while extolling the virtues of the scribe's life. But this satirical take has a point. While it highlights the scribe's intellectual work, it also subtly acknowledges that the quill wasn't always mightier than the plough when it came to earning a living. Economically, scribes were better off than those toiling in the fields, but they weren't exactly rolling in gold. Payment was often in kind, rations of food and beer, occasionally land if you were lucky. It's like being paid in cafeteria lunches and gym memberships. You survived, but you weren't living the high life. And while you may have had access to the halls of power, the doors didn't always open to you. Now let's talk about the hierarchy of scribes themselves. Not all scribes were created equal. There was a pecking order, with the chief scribe at the top, overseeing the work of lesser scribes. Think of it as the ancient version of corporate ladder climbing, where you could move from a junior scribe to a senior position if you played your hieroglyphs right. The top dogs had more responsibility and a closer connection to the upper echelons of society, but even they had to answer to the nobles and pharaohs. And here's another myth to bust: the idea that scribes were isolated geniuses, toiling away in solitude. The truth is, scribes worked in busy scriptoria, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of other scribes and apprentices. It was a communal environment, more like a newsroom than a solitary writer's retreat. Information was shared, techniques were passed down, and mistakes were, well, let's just say they weren't taken lightly. So next time you see a serene scribe immortalized in tomb art, remember that behind the calm facade was a professional juggling deadlines, errors, and the constant pressure of producing perfect records. It was a life of contradictions, a blend of privilege and pressure, prestige and monotony. The ink-stained fingers of a scribe held the power to record history, yet often found themselves bound by the same social and economic constraints that governed the lives of the very people they wrote about. As you reflect on the realities of the scribe's life, it's clear that their legacy was not just in the words they penned, but in the stories they left behind, stories that continue to captivate and challenge our understanding of ancient Egyptian society. And with that, let's pause to consider what comes next for our ink-stained hero. After all, the journey of a scribe is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more insights into this fascinating world. Stay tuned, because in ancient Egypt, the pen never rests for long. The pen may rest for a moment, but the ink-stained legacy of the scribe endures, etched into the annals of time like hieroglyphs on a temple wall. You see, being a scribe in ancient Egypt was not just about jotting down the day-to-day minutiae. It was about crafting the narrative of a civilization. Sure, you were huddled in a dusty room, surrounded by the rhythmic scratching of reeds on papyrus, but your work had a significance that echoed through the ages. Imagine holding that kind of power, your words, once inked, becoming the voice of history itself. Think about it. Without scribes, we wouldn't have the Rosetta Stone, that linguistic Swiss army knife that cracked open the secrets of hieroglyphs. Discovered in 1799, this trilingual marvel was the ancient world's equivalent of a magical decoder ring, inscribed with the same text in Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic scripts. It was the scribes who meticulously carved those symbols, preserving a culture that might have otherwise faded into the sands of time. Their dedication to recording everything, from religious rituals to tax receipts, allowed future generations to peek into the daily life of a civilization that built wonders like the pyramids while pondering the afterlife with a fervor that would make a philosopher blush. Now, let's address the ancient elephant in the room, the myth of the all-knowing scribe, wielding wisdom like a pharaoh's scepter. Sure, Scribes were revered for their skills, but they were also human, prone to errors and frustrations, just like the rest of us. They were the ones who turned the ephemeral into the eternal, chronicling everything from royal decrees to local gossip. Yet behind the romance of their role lurked the harsh realities of a bureaucratic grind. Talk about a high-stakes job. One slip of the reed pen, and you might find yourself explaining to an irate noble why his cattle count was a few cows short. Economically, scribes occupied a curious niche. They were better off than the average farmer, whose life was a never-ending cycle of planting and harvesting, yet they were far from wealthy. Their compensation often came in the form of rations, barley, bread, and beer, with the occasional slice of meat thrown in for good measure. It was subsistence living, sure, but it kept them fed and housed, allowing them to focus on their craft. In a society where literacy was as rare as rain in the desert, scribes were indispensable, yet they remained tethered to the economic constraints of their time. Politically, the scribe's role was both empowering and limiting. On one hand, they were close to the corridors of power, privy to the inner workings of the state. On the other hand, they operated under a strict hierarchy, with every decree and document scrutinized by those higher up the chain. Imagine being the trusted gatekeeper of knowledge, yet always under the watchful eye of those who could make or break your career with a flick of their finger. It was a precarious balance of influence and subservience, a tightrope walk across the chasm of authority. Socially, scribes were like chameleons, blending into different strata while never fully belonging to any. They rubbed shoulders with the elite, yet they were not of them. Their education and literacy set them apart, creating a social liminality that was both a blessing and a curse. They were respected, but not always embraced, admired for their intellect, but often sidelined when it came to the spoils of power. If you've ever felt like the smartest person in the room yet utterly invisible, you might just relate to the ancient scribe's plight. But here's the kicker. Despite the grind, the ink-stained fingers, and the endless hieroglyphic drudgery, scribes left a legacy that outshone even the mightiest pharaohs. Their records became the building blocks of history, offering a window into a world that was both alien and familiar. Through their eyes, we glimpse the grandeur and banality of ancient Egyptian life, from the bustling markets of Thebes to the solemn rituals of the mortuary temples. In their words, we find the echoes of a civilization that dreamed of eternity even as it grappled with the day-to-day challenges of survival. So, as you sit there pondering the dusty, ink-stained life of a scribe, remember this: their struggles were not in vain. They were the unsung heroes of the ancient world, the keepers of knowledge whose work would illuminate the past for millennia to come. In a time when the written word was a rare and precious commodity, they wielded it with skill and dedication, ensuring that the story of Egypt would not be lost to the sands of time. Their legacy challenges our modern understanding of ancient societies, reminding us that history is not just about kings and battles, but also about the scribes who quietly chronicled it all. They were the architects of memory, the guardians of a culture that continues to fascinate and inspire us today. And while their ink-stained fingers may have long since turned to dust, their words remain, a testament to the enduring power of the written word. So next time you find yourself staring at a text message or typing out an email, spare a thought for the scribes of ancient Egypt, those tireless chroniclers who proved that, while the pen may not literally be mightier than the sword, it certainly has a longer shelf life. In 1526, Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire, crossed the Khyber Pass, bringing with him not just an army but a penchant for poetry and a surprisingly green thumb. Forget the image of a warlord obsessed with palaces. Babur was more into landscaping than laying bricks. His personal memoirs, the Baburnama, reveal a man who delighted in the scent of flowers, the taste of fresh fruit, and the tranquility of gardens. He famously griped about the lack of good melons in India, an unusual concern for a conqueror setting the stage for one of history's most opulent empires. But let's pump the brakes on the perfumed gardens for a second and talk about the political chaos Babur waded through. By the early 16th century, the Indian subcontinent was a tapestry of fragmented kingdoms, each fiercely independent and often at each other's throats. The Delhi Sultanate, a shadow of its former glory, was ripe for the taking, thanks to internal strife and weak leadership. Babur's decisive victory at the Battle of Panipat in 1526 wasn't just a military triumph. It was a masterstroke of political opportunism. Now, if you're wondering why Babur's architectural legacy is a bit of a blank slate, blame his priorities. He was a bit busy establishing control over his new empire, and quite frankly, he seemed more interested in the lay of the land than laying foundations. His contribution to architecture was more about setting the stage, literally, by planting the first Mughal gardens in India. Think of them as the empire's green rooms before the main act. Enter Humayun, Babur's son, whose reign was as smooth as a roller coaster ride. Humayun's architectural ambitions were more about what could have been. His reign was marred by political instability, including a temporary loss of his throne to the Afghan leader Sher Shah Suri. Humayun spent a good chunk of his life in exile, which doesn't leave much time for building anything other than a sense of longing. When he wasn't dodging arrows, he was dreaming about grand buildings, but his dreams were mostly deferred. However, Humayun's return to power in 1555 marked a turning point, albeit a brief one. The architectural scene was finally set to flourish, but fate had other plans. In a tragic twist, Humayun died in 1556 after an unfortunate trip down his library stairs, proof that books can indeed be hazardous to your health. His untimely death left the architectural blueprint of the empire largely unrealized, but all was not lost. His legacy was cemented, quite literally, with the construction of Humayun's tomb, commissioned by his wife, Empress Begum. This mausoleum, completed in 1572, would set the precedent for Mughal architecture, blending Persian influences with local craftsmanship. So, what did Humayun's short-lived reign and architectural aspirations achieve? They laid the groundwork for his son Akbar, who stepped onto the scene with a vision as grand as his ambition. Under Akbar, the Mughal Empire would transform into a powerhouse, both politically and architecturally. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. The real story here is how Babur's love for nature and Humayun's fleeting architectural dreams paved the path for the monumental achievements that would follow. In the next act, Akbar would take the Mughal Empire to new heights, literally and figuratively, as he started constructing the empire's iconic structures. But it's essential to appreciate the roots, sometimes quite literally planted by Babur, that allowed Akbar's vision to flourish. Babur and Humayun might not have left behind towering monuments, but they established the cultural and political bedrock upon which future emperors would build their legacies. While Babur's gardens and Humayun's tomb might not scream architectural empire, they whisper the beginnings of something much larger. They remind us that even the most magnificent empires start with small, sometimes accidental steps, like a conqueror who just wanted a decent melon and a king who couldn't quite conquer a staircase. With the stage set by Babur's green fingers and Humayun's grandiose but tragically incomplete visions, Akbar stepped onto the scene like a director with a blockbuster script in his back pocket. If Babur was the warm-up act and Humayun the brief interlude, Akbar was definitely the main event. His reign, which kicked off in 1556, was a time when architecture was not just about bricks and mortar, but a statement of imperial might and cultural fusion. Picture a young empire that was still figuring out its identity, and Akbar, with his penchant for grandeur, was determined to make sure it was both glorious and unmistakably Mughal. First on the list was Agra Fort, which was more than just a pretty face. This red sandstone behemoth was Akbar's answer to the perennial question, what do you get someone who has everything? Apparently, a fortress sprawling over 94 acres, surrounded by a 5-kilometer-long defensive wall. Built between 1565 and 1573, it was a statement of power and protection, a place to house the empire's treasury, and of course, a royal residence that screamed, "We've arrived." The architectural style of Agra Fort was no random mishmash. Akbar was a master of blending aesthetics, pulling from Persian, Hindu, and Islamic traditions like a cultural DJ, remixing the best beats. The fort's design was a testament to his vision of a syncretic empire, where diverse elements came together to form something uniquely Mughal. Akbar was no slouch when it came to orchestrating these massive projects. Either he had a whole crew of architects and craftsmen, Hindu and Muslim alike, who brought his ideas to life. Debunking the myth of the lone genius, it was a collaborative effort, a sort of 16th century architectural jam session. But before you get carried away with visions of a harmonious empire and its benevolent ruler, let's pump the brakes on the Akbar as a divine figure myth. Sure, Akbar was a visionary, but the story that he was a kind of divine king, or that he actually believed he was ordained by the heavens, is a bit of a stretch. This narrative was partly fueled by the Din-i-Ilahi, a new religious movement he initiated. It combined elements of various religions, reflecting Akbar's philosophical bent more than any messianic complex. Truth is, the emperor was more pragmatist than prophet, using these ideas to consolidate power among his diverse subjects. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty of construction logistics, because building such monumental structures wasn't just about creativity, it was a logistical symphony. Imagine coordinating thousands of laborers, sourcing tons of red sandstone from quarries miles away, and managing the whims of the Yamuna River, which flowed right by Agra Fort. This was no small feat in the 16th century. Labor was organized on a massive scale, with skilled artisans and unskilled laborers working side by side. This was a time when the economy was as much about manpower as it was about money, and Akbar had both in spades, thanks to the empire's expanding territories and growing wealth. The economic impact of this building spree was both profound and multifaceted. These projects pumped life into local economies, creating jobs and stimulating trade. Artisans honed their skills, and new techniques were developed, cementing the Mughal Empire's reputation for architectural innovation. But here's a sharp observation. While these projects created prosperity for some, they were also a stark reminder of the economic disparities of the time. The grandeur of Agra Fort stood in sharp contrast to the realities faced by the common laborer who toiled under the sun for a pittance. Yet, Akbar's architectural ambitions were not just about fortresses and defenses. He had a softer side, too, which came to life in the city of Feudal. Built between 1571 and 1585, this was Akbar's piece de résistance, a new city to celebrate the birth of his son, Salim. But it was also a pet project, a place where he could experiment with architectural styles and urban planning. Feudal was a city of sandstone dreams, an urban tapestry woven with palaces, masks, and public spaces that showcased the fusion of Persian elegance and Indic motifs. However, here's the kicker. Despite its grand design, Feudal was abandoned just 14 years after it was built. The reasons for this abrupt desertion are still debated, but water scarcity and logistical challenges are the usual suspects. It's a classic case of ambition outpacing practicality, a cautionary tale about the limits of even the grandest visions. The city remains a ghostly monument to Akbar's aspirations, a sandstone skeleton standing testament to the emperor's reach exceeding his grasp. In the end, Akbar's architectural achievements were more than just buildings. They were symbols of the empire's cultural and political synthesis. They showed the world a Mughal empire that was not just about conquest and control, but about creating a legacy that fused different traditions into something entirely new. Yet, like all great stories, the tale of Akbar's architectural revolution is as much about the myths it inspired as the realities it created. While the red sandstone of Agra Fort and the silent streets of Feudal stand as monuments to his vision, they also remind us that history's most captivating tales are those where legend and truth intermingle, leaving us to ponder the line between the two. Stay tuned, because as Akbar's story unfolds, the Mughal Empire's architectural narrative is far from over. We'll see how his successors took the baton and ran with it, crafting structures that would capture the world's imagination and cement the Mughals' place in history, quite literally. But for now, let's leave the bricks and mortar of Akbar's era behind, knowing that the foundation he laid was as much about ideas as it was about stone. With Akbar's architectural legacy firmly planted in the Mughal narrative, the empire's next chapter belonged to his son, Jahangir. Now, Jahangir was known more for his love of art and wine than his blueprint prowess. Picture a ruler who'd rather be painting a peacock than plotting out a palace. But don't let his artistic inclinations fool you. Jahangir was no passive patron. His reign, from 1605 to 1627, was a canvas painted with political intrigue and subtle shifts in architectural focus. Jahangir's contributions to Mughal architecture were more about refinement than revolution. He preferred to add polish to what his father had started, akin to a director giving a film that final edit to make it Oscar-worthy. One of his noble projects was the Shalimar Bagh in Kashmir, a garden paradise that brings us full circle back to Babur's love of nature. Built in 1619, these gardens were a nod to the empire's Persian roots, with terraces, fountains, and meticulously planned symmetry. Jahangir wasn't about grand fortresses or sprawling cities. He was more, let's make this garden Instagrammable before Instagram was a thing. However, Jahangir's real legacy lies in how he set the stage for his son, Shah Jahan. If Jahangir was the warm-up act with his refined sensibilities, Shah Jahan was the headliner who would blow the architectural roof off. And speaking of roofs, let's talk about the Taj Mahal. You know the story. A heartbroken emperor, a beloved wife, a mausoleum that put all other love stories to shame. But wait, before you grab the tissues, let's cut through the romantic haze and look at the stone-cold facts. Shah Jahan's reign, starting in 1628, was a spectacle of opulence and ambition, and the Taj Mahal was its crown jewel. Built between 1632 and 1643, this monument to love was more than just a pretty face. It was an engineering marvel, a logistical feat that would make modern project managers break out in a sweat. The Taj Mahal involved 20,000 workers, including artisans, laborers, and architects from across the empire and beyond. The artisans came from as far as Persia and the Ottoman Empire, bringing their distinct styles and skills into the mix. The cost, an eye-watering 32 million rupees at the time, which translates to roughly $1 billion today. Yes, you heard that right. This was no budget project. The white marble was sourced from Makrana, over 300 kilometers away, while precious stones came from the far reaches of Asia. Lapis lazuli, turquoise, and jade were inlaid with precision that could rival a Swiss watchmaker. But there's a twist to this tale of splendor. The Taj Mahal, while undeniably breathtaking, didn't generate economic returns. It was a symbol of love, sure, but also of the empire's immense wealth and Shah Jahan's desire to leave an indelible mark on history. While the romantic narrative of Shah Jahan's love for Mumtaz Mahal is irresistible, the true story is more complex. Behind the marble facade was an economic powerhouse, grappling with the costs of maintaining such grandeur. The Taj Mahal was an economic statement as much as a romantic one, showcasing the empire's resources and Shah Jahan's capacity for extravagance. But here's a sharp observation. While the emperor was building a mausoleum for his beloved, the empire's coffers were draining faster than a leaky bucket in a monsoon. Shah Jahan's architectural ambitions weren't limited to the Taj. He had a penchant for transforming landscapes, much like his grandfather Akbar, but with even more flair. Take the Red Fort in Delhi, another of his masterpieces, built from 1638 to 1648. This fortress palace complex was not just a seat of power, but a statement of Mughal supremacy. Covering 254 acres and wrapped in red sandstone walls, it was a fortress fit for a king who wanted to outdo every architectural marvel before him. But before you start picturing Shah Jahan as the ultimate architectural hero, let's debunk a myth or two. While his reign saw the creation of stunning structures, it also marked the beginning of financial strain for the empire. The lavish spending wasn't sustainable, and by the time his son Aurangzeb took the throne, the empire was feeling the economic pinch. The grandeur came at a cost, literally, and the empire's increasing expenses strained its ability to maintain such opulence. Shah Jahan's legacy is a reminder of the delicate dance between ambition and resources. His projects were undeniably beautiful, but they also highlighted the Mughal Empire's vulnerabilities. The emperor's vision was clear: to create an architectural legacy that would echo through the ages. Yet, the reality was that such grandeur comes with strings attached. The Taj Mahal and the Red Fort are testaments to his ambition, but they also serve as cautionary tales about the perils of unchecked extravagance. As Shah Jahan's story unfolds, we'll see how his architectural dreams and economic realities created a complex tapestry that future generations would grapple with. The Mughal Empire's architectural narrative didn't end with him. It evolved, reflecting the changing tides of power and the shifting sands of fortune. Stay tuned, because we're about to delve into the reign of Aurangzeb, where the story takes a darker turn and the empire's architectural ambitions face new challenges. But for now, let's leave Shah Jahan basking in the marble glow of the Taj Mahal, a testament to his love, his vision, and his empire's fleeting opulence. As Shah Jahan's architectural dreams cast long shadows over the Mughal Empire, it was Aurangzeb who stepped onto the stage, inheriting not just a kingdom, but a treasury already feeling the pinch from all that opulence. Forget the romanticized vision of a ruler clutching blueprints for grand palaces. Aurangzeb was more likely to be found clutching a prayer mat. His reputation as a destroyer of temples and a puritanical ruler has been painted with broad, dark strokes, often overshadowing the more nuanced truths of his reign. Sure, Aurangzeb wasn't pulling a Shah Jahan by erecting gleaming marble mausoleums, but he wasn't exactly the architectural Grinch either. His contributions leaned heavily into military architecture. Let's talk about the Bibi-Ka Maqbara in Aurangabad, often dubbed the poor man's Taj Mahal. Built between 1660 and 1661 by Aurangzeb's son Azam Shah in memory of his mother, Dilruz Banu Begum. This mausoleum might lack the grandeur of its Agra counterpart, but it tells a story of architectural continuity amidst changing priorities. This wasn't about outshining the Taj. It was about preserving a legacy under more constrained circumstances. When Azam Shah was working with a budget that was more sensible savings than spare no expense, the Bibi-Ka Maqbara still managed to echo the elegant Mughal architecture of its predecessors. Aurangzeb's reign from 1658 to 1707 was marked by a focus on military might and expansion. You see, Aurangzeb was less about marble and more about mortar, turning his attention to fortifications and strategic military architecture. One key example is the fort at Daulatabad. Known for its labyrinthine defense systems and impenetrable walls, this fort was not just about keeping enemies at bay, but also about showcasing the pragmatic side of Mughal architecture. If Shah Jahan's structures were poems in stone, Aurangzeb's were more like gritty war novels, with a focus on function over form. But let's not gloss over the economic context here. By the time Aurangzeb took the throne, the Mughal Empire was a Goliath with a slightly wobbly economic foundation. The cost of endless wars and the maintenance of grand structures built by his forebears meant that Aurangzeb had to tighten the imperial purse strings. His administration was marked by a keen awareness of economic constraints, leading to a shift in architectural priorities. The military projects weren't just about defense. They were strategic investments in the empire's stability, a bulwark against the rising tide of internal and external threats. Now, let's tackle the elephant, or rather, the temple, in the room, Aurangzeb's alleged spree of temple destruction. It's true that he ordered the demolition of several temples, but the narrative that he was some kind of architectural wrecking ball is overly simplistic. While religious motivations played a role, many of these demolitions were politically motivated, aimed at quelling potential rebellions and consolidating power. It's a harsh reality of empire building. Sometimes, maintaining control means making unpopular choices. This wasn't about an inherent dislike for temples. It was about the cold calculus of power. In terms of urban planning, Aurangzeb's reign saw the expansion of cities like Delhi and Lahore. While he wasn't laying the groundwork for new cities like Akbar, he was ensuring existing ones could support the empire's administrative and military needs. Take Lahore Fort, for instance. During Aurangzeb's rule, the fort saw significant enhancements, including the construction of the Alamgiri Gate in 1674. This wasn't just an entryway. It was a statement, a grand entrance that mirrored the empire's enduring strength even amid austerity measures. Economically, Aurangzeb's reign wasn't as dire as some narratives suggest. The Mughal Empire's revenue system was complex and at times incredibly effective. Land revenue, trade, and taxes on agriculture were meticulously managed, and despite the costs of warfare and administration, the empire remained a formidable economic power. However, the strain of constant military campaigns and the need to maintain vast territories did create cracks in the empire's economic armor. The challenge was maintaining the delicate balance between expansion and sustainability. a dance that Aurangzeb performed with varying degrees of success. Let's not ignore the human element here. Aurangzeb was a ruler caught between tradition and pragmatism, where his personal austerity often clashed with the expectations of an empire accustomed to grandeur. His frugality was legendary, reportedly stitching his own caps and living a life more akin to that of a monk than a monarch. This personal austerity, however, did not translate into an empire free from extravagance. The Mughal administration still demanded a level of opulence to assert its sovereignty and legitimacy, a contradiction that Aurangzeb had to navigate carefully. Amidst these economic and architectural realities, Aurangzeb's reign also highlighted the empire's cultural tensions. His strict adherence to Islamic law, while popular among some factions, alienated others. The reimposition of the jizya, tax on non-Muslims, in 1679 was one such policy that sparked discontent, illustrating the tightrope Aurangzeb walked between religious conviction and the practical needs of governance. In the end, Aurangzeb's architectural legacy is a study in contrasts. His contributions were rooted in necessity and strategy, rather than the pursuit of beauty for its own sake. While he may not have left behind the dazzling marble monuments of his predecessors, his reign saw the strengthening of the empire's defenses and the reinforcement of its territories. These were structures that spoke to the realities of his time, reflecting a ruler more concerned with the empire's survival than its splendor. So, as we peel back the layers of Aurangzeb's reign, we find a narrative richer and more complex than the simplistic tales of destruction and austerity. His era was one of architectural continuity and adaptation, where the Mughal Empire's priorities shifted to meet the challenges of an evolving world. As we turn the page to the next chapter, examining how his successors navigated the legacy he left behind, the story of the Mughal Empire continues to unfold, full of intrigue, ambition, and the timeless struggle between dreams and reality. Stay tuned, because the Mughal saga is far from over, and the lessons of history are just waiting to be unearthed. As we pivot from Aurangzeb's pragmatic reign, the Mughal Empire finds itself on the brink of a new, yet uncertain era. The empire was no longer the juggernaut it once was, and this was reflected in its architectural endeavors, or lack thereof. Post-Aurangzeb, the empire was like a grand old mansion with a leaky roof, still standing, but in desperate need of repair. Let's dig into how these monumental structures fared as the Mughal grip loosened, and the British began to eye the subcontinent like a kid in a candy store. First, let's talk about the structures themselves. The once magnificent Feudal Sikri, for instance, went from a bustling capital to a deserted relic, its sandstone walls echoing with the whispers of what could have been. As the empire's coffers shrank faster than wool sweater in a hot wash, maintenance of these architectural wonders became increasingly untenable. The Taj Mahal, that perennial postcard darling, began to show its age. By the time the British arrived, the place was in such disrepair that Lord Curzon, the Viceroy of India, felt compelled to launch a restoration project in the early 20th century, almost like a fixer-upper reality show, but with a far grander budget. Now, in terms of influence, Mughal architecture was like that trendsetter in high school whose style everyone eventually copied, even if they didn't quite get it right. The Mughal aesthetic, the domes, the minarets, the intricate jali screens, became the blueprint for Indo-Islamic architecture, influencing the Rajput palaces and Sikh temples that followed. The British even got in on the action, with colonial buildings in Delhi and Calcutta borrowing heavily from Mughal motifs, a sort of architectural homage cum cultural appropriation. Economically speaking, the Mughal legacy was a double-edged sword. On one hand, these structures were symbols of past prosperity. On the other, they were costly reminders of an empire that had once been flush with resources, but now struggled to maintain its grandeur. The British, ever the opportunists, saw potential in these monuments beyond mere aesthetics. By the late 1800, the Taj Mahal was part of their colonial PR campaign, a way to show the world that India was a land of exotic beauty under benevolent British stewardship. Never mind the fact they'd looted India's wealth like pirates with an empire. Let's not forget the social and political factors at play during this architectural twilight. As the Mughal Empire waned, power dynamics shifted dramatically. Regional powers like the Marathas and Sikhs began to assert control, while the British East India Company slowly morphed from a trading company into a de facto government. Amidst this chaotic power shuffle, Mughal architecture served as a poignant reminder of a more unified past, even as the present fragmented into a mosaic of competing interests. Now, let's tackle some myths head-on. The romanticized view of the Mughals as architectural savants creating solely for artistic expression is more fairy tale than fact. Sure, they loved aesthetics, but these structures were as much about asserting dominance and showcasing wealth as they were about beauty. The Taj Mahal, while a love letter in stone, was also a declaration of imperial might. The myth of the Mughals as benevolent builders overlooks the economic and political machinations that underpinned their architectural feats. Romantic, absolutely. Realistic, not quite. In modern India, these Mughal masterpieces are more than just remnants of a bygone era. They're cultural touchstones and major tourist magnets. The Taj Mahal alone draws millions each year, contributing significantly to the local economy and serving as a global icon of India itself. But here's a sharp observation. While these structures are celebrated today, they also pose a challenge. Balancing preservation with accessibility is a tightrope walk, especially when international attention and funding are at stake. So, what does the Mughal architectural legacy tell us about human nature? It shows our relentless desire to leave a mark, to build something lasting even when the sands of time threaten to erase it all. It reveals the tension between glory and pragmatism, where dreams of beauty often clash with the cold, hard truths of economics and politics. In the end, the Mughals remind us that history is both a grand tapestry and a patchwork quilt, full of contradictions and complexities that defy easy explanations. As we wrap up this architectural odyssey, consider this. The Mughal Empire may have crumbled, but its buildings continue to stand, defying the ravages of time and history with a quiet dignity. They are testaments to human ambition and creativity, as well as monuments to the perilous dance between power and legacy. In a world where the line between myth and reality is often blurred, the Mughals offer a vivid reminder that history's greatest stories are woven from both, each structure a chapter, each stone a word in the epic tale of empire. And as you drift off, remember, history, much like architecture, is best appreciated not just for its grandeur, but for the stories it tells and the truths it reveals. In the grand tapestry of ancient history, the Nabataeans emerge like a sandstorm on the horizon, unexpected, powerful, and leaving behind an unforgettable mark. These desert-dwelling nomads, who went from roaming the arid expanses of the Arabian Peninsula to founding a trading empire, were the ultimate underdogs. Picture a ragtag group of wanderers who had the savvy to transform their inhospitable home into a bustling crossroads of commerce. You couldn't make this up, but thankfully, you don't have to. Now, these folks had a knack for finding opportunity in the unlikeliest of places. A bit like that friend who always turns up at the right place at the right time with the best deal. While the rest of the ancient world was busy figuring out how not to get conquered, the Nabataeans were keenly focused on the sweet smell of profit. And by profit, I mean literal sense. Frankincense and myrrh, the ancient equivalents of gold and Bitcoin. These aromatic treasures traveled from Arabia to the Mediterranean, and the Nabataeans were sitting pretty on the trade routes like an ancient toll booth operator with a keen eye for business. Strategically positioned in the heart of the incense trade routes, the Nabataeans were like the middlemen of the desert. We're talking about a people who understood the principle of location, 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 long before it became a real estate mantra. Petra, their crowning achievement, wasn't just a city carved into rose-red cliffs. It was a symbol of their economic genius. But let's not get too romantic about this. Petra wasn't built in a day, nor was it just a pretty face. The Nabataeans knew how to work their surroundings. Imagine setting up shop in a place where water is scarcer than a Wi-Fi signal in the wilderness. Yet, these desert entrepreneurs developed water management systems that would make a modern engineer raise an eyebrow. They constructed an elaborate network of cisterns, channels, and dams to capture and store every drop of precious rainwater. Not bad for a civilization that started out with little more than camels and a twinkle of ambition in their eyes. Ah, the camels, those grumpy, spitting creatures that were the Nabataeans' secret weapon. They used camels like the semis of the ancient world, hauling goods across vast stretches of desert with impressive endurance and efficiency. Forget horsepower. The Nabataeans had camel power, and they knew how to use it. These beasts of burden helped turn arid wastelands into lucrative trade corridors, connecting the riches of the East with the hungry markets of the West. Let's not gloss over the harsh realities, though. The romantic image of caravans serenely crossing the desert belies the grueling, often perilous nature of the trade. Sandstorms, bandits, and the relentless sun were just a few of the hazards. Yet the Nabataeans thrived, driven by a combination of daring and ingenuity that saw them rise from obscurity to influence. Their success was as much about adapting to their environment as it was about exploiting it. So, what was it about the Nabataeans that enabled their meteoric rise? Part of the answer lies in their ability to blend cultures and adopt the best from their neighbors. While they were fiercely independent, they weren't above borrowing a trick or two from the Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians, whether it was architectural styles, religious practices, or trade techniques. This cultural chameleon act not only enriched their own society, but also made them indispensable middlemen in the trade network. As we peel back the layers of this fascinating civilization, it's worth noting that the Nabataeans weren't just about commerce. They had a rich and complex society with its own language, art, and religion. Theirs was a world of gods and goddesses, each with their own temples and rituals, often blending influences from the diverse cultures they encountered. Their inscriptions, some of which still adorn the ancient rock faces of Petra, offer tantalizing glimpses into their everyday lives and beliefs. In the end, the Nabataeans were a testament to the power of adaptability and innovation. They took the harsh realities of their environment and turned them into advantages, creating a legacy that has endured long after their kingdom's decline. So, as we delve into the nitty-gritty of their rise, think of the Nabataeans as the original entrepreneurs of the desert, visionaries with a knack for making the impossible possible. And for a civilization that began with nothing but the sands underfoot, that's no small feat. So, let's step into the Nabataean Golden Age, a time when Petra wasn't just a city. It was the ancient world's hardest destination. Imagine a mix of Las Vegas glamour with a touch of Indiana Jones intrigue. Trade was the lifeblood of this era, and the Nabataeans were the undisputed maestros, orchestrating a symphony of commerce that echoed across continents. Petra, their crowning jewel, was more than just an architectural wonder. It was a statement. The treasury, or Al-Khazne if you're feeling fancy, wasn't really a treasury. That's right, folks, no ancient piggy banks here. Instead, it was a tomb built to impress, a testament to the Nabataean flair for turning the mundane task of death into an occasion of grandeur. Carved directly from the rose-red sandstone cliffs, it screamed, "Look at us!" with all the subtlety of a social media influencer's latest post. The intricacy of its facade, that blend of Hellenistic and Near Eastern styles, was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about flexing architectural muscles. It was a visual mixtape of styles, a grand architectural show-off session that left even their Roman admirers whispering "nice" under their togas. But let's talk about the monastery, or add dare to the locals. Bigger and bolder than the treasury, it was a later addition to Petra's skyline, and yet another exercise in the Nabataeans' favorite pastime, impressing visitors. Standing a towering 45 meters high, it was less of a monastery and more of a colossal billboard, shouting to the heavens and anyone else paying attention, "We've got the skills, we've got the style, and yes, we did it on a cliff." What better way to show you've made it than by carving a giant edifice into a mountaintop? Now, how did the Nabataeans manage to keep this trade powerhouse running smoothly? Political savvy, my friends, political savvy. They were like the Switzerland of the ancient world, adept at playing everyone, but never fully committing to anyone. They cozied up to the Greeks, offering alliances that were as solid as a celebrity marriage. Lots of glitz, not much guarantee. When the Romans came knocking, the Nabataeans welcomed them with open arms and a calculated grin, securing their trade routes while maintaining a semblance of autonomy. The Nabataeans were masters of diplomacy, a skill honed from their days of blending cultures and borrowing ideas. They knew when to swap allegiances like changing channels on a remote, ensuring that they remained indispensable to their more powerful neighbors. This political chess game was played with finesse, allowing the Nabataeans to maintain control over their lucrative trade routes, while others fought over empires and territories. Their knack for economic and political maneuvering was reflected in their currency too. The Nabataean coins, minted from the 3rd century BCE, were a testament to their independence and creativity. These coins bore the faces of their kings, not the distant guards of their neighbors, a subtle assertion of their identity amidst the cultural melting pot they inhabited. And let's not forget the inscriptions, written in their own script, a blend of Aramaic and Arabic. They stood as a reminder that even in a world dominated by Greek and Roman culture, Nabataeans were distinct and proud. Petra's bustling markets were the pulse of this thriving kingdom, where merchants from across the world bartered goods ranging from spices and textiles to precious metals. It was a melting pot of cultures, languages and currencies, a place where the East met the West in a cacophony of commerce. The Nabataeans were the puppet masters, pulling the strings of this economic machine with the precision of a seasoned conductor. As the Nabataean kingdom flourished, so did its cultural and intellectual life. They were not just traders, but also patrons of the arts, with Petra serving as a hub of creativity and innovation. The city's architecture was not just about grandeur, but also about functionality, with its ingenious water management systems ensuring that this desert city could support a thriving population. Imagine aqueducts and cisterns that rivaled those of Rome, all crafted by a people who had mastered the art of turning scarcity into abundance. But while Petra glittered in the desert sun, the Nabataeans were acutely aware of the shifting sands of politics. Their alliances were strategic, their loyalty carefully measured against the scales of profit and survival. It was a delicate dance, balancing on a tightrope of diplomacy while the winds of change blew around them. The Nabataeans might have been masters of their domain, but they were not immune to the forces that would eventually reshape their world. As the Roman Empire expanded its reach, the Nabataeans found themselves at a crossroads. Their independence was a precious commodity, but even the most skilled negotiators couldn't hold back the tide of Roman ambition forever. Yet, in true Nabataean style, they adapted and thrived, their legacy enduring long after the last caravan had crossed the sands. They were the original architects of their destiny, carving their place in history with the same precision as they carved their city into the rock. So, while Petra might now stand as a silent monument to the past, in its day it was a testament to the Nabataean spirit, bold, innovative, and unapologetically grand. As we continue to explore their story, remember that this was a civilization that danced to its own tune, a tune that still echoes through the ages, reminding us of a world where trade was king and every sandstone facade had a tale to tell. And so, Petra stands quiet now, whispering tales of the Nabataean spirit, a mashup of audacity and finesse that would make even the smoothest talker drool with envy. But let's not get lost in the romance of rosy cliffs and forgotten kingdoms. The Nabataeans were more than just rock carvers or trade titans. They were cultural chameleons, blending the hues of Greek, Roman, and Arabian influences into a kaleidoscope of innovation and identity. You see, the Nabataeans were like that friend who can seamlessly adapt to any social situation, equally at home in a toga party as they are at a desert bonfire. When the Greeks and Romans were throwing cultural shindigs, the Nabataeans RSVP'd with enthusiasm, adopting and adapting what they found useful. This wasn't some mindless imitation. It was a strategic absorption of styles and practices that could boost their prestige and power. They took the grandiosity of Greek architecture and the practicality of Roman engineering, stirred in a dash of their own desert spice, and voila, a civilization that was as cosmopolitan as it was cunning. Take their art, for instance. The intricate carvings on Petra's facades are like an ancient Instagram feed, showcasing a fusion of styles that would have made any art collector drool. The treasury's facade is a perfect example. Corinthian columns and Greek guards meet Nabataean deities in a stone-carved cultural summit. Yet behind all this grandeur was a practical motive: impress the visitors, charm the traders, and remind everyone of the Nabataean knack for turning cultural borrowing into a form of art. Speaking of borrowing, let's talk script. The Nabataeans developed their own alphabet, a delicate dance of letters that merged Aramaic curves with Arabic influences. This script wasn't just graffiti on a cliff wall. It was a declaration of identity in a world dominated by foreign tongues. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a signature logo, distinct, memorable, and a constant reminder that the Nabataeans were nobody's cultural doormats. They weren't content to let their language be a footnote in history. They made it a headline. But it wasn't all about art and language. Religion in the Nabataean kingdom was like a cocktail mixed by a bartender who's had one too many, unexpected yet surprisingly harmonious. They worshipped a pantheon that was as eclectic as it was extensive. Dashara was their main deity, a nod to their Arabian roots, while Al-Azza, a goddess borrowed from the wider Semitic pantheon, held sway as well. Greek gods were also invited to this divine party, gracing temples and rituals in a cultural crossover that would put modern fusion cuisine to shame. It was a divine melting pot, a reminder that the Nabataeans were never shy about mixing faiths as long as it served their purpose. Now, let's bust a myth or two, shall we? The romanticized image of the Nabataeans as mystical desert dwellers, like some ancient Jedi roaming the sand dunes, is a bit overblown. Sure, they thrived in the desert, but they weren't just meditating under a cactus. They were astute, shrewd, and always aware of the political and economic currents swirling around them. Their adaptability wasn't some spiritual enlightenment. It was survival of the savviest. In a world where empires rose and fell like dominoes, the Nabataeans knew that the game was about staying relevant, not just surviving. To paint them as mere nomads with a penchant for pretty rocks would be missing the point. They were masters of adaptation, cultural chameleons who could shift hues at a moment's notice. But more importantly, they understood that power wasn't just in walls or armies. It was in ideas, in the ability to weave a tapestry of influences that was uniquely Nabataean. They turned the ancient world's melting pot into a strategic advantage, crafting a narrative of prosperity that echoed through time. So, as we pause to admire their legacy, remember this: the Nabataeans weren't just desert dwellers with a flair for the dramatic. They were strategists, artists, and thinkers who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. And in the grand mosaic of history, their story is a reminder that sometimes the ones who adapt are the ones who thrive. As we continue this journey, keep an eye out for those whispers of innovation and cunning that made the Nabataeans not just survivors, but trailblazers of their age. So, as we marvel at the Nabataeans' impressive high-wire act of diplomacy and trade, we can't ignore the ominous rumblings in the distance, like a desert storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Enter the Romans, the empire with an insatiable appetite for expansion, and a penchant for gobbling up territories like a kid with a jar of cookies. Around the turn of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire started casting its gaze toward the Nabataean kingdom, eyeing it like a cat sizing up a canary. Now, let's get real. Rome wasn't exactly known for subtlety. By AD 106, they were the ancient world's equivalent of a corporate takeover artist, and the Nabataeans were about to get a first-hand lesson in hostile acquisitions. But before we dive into the inevitable annexation, let's rewind a bit and explore the economic and political currents that led to this historical merger, or rather, absorption. At its peak, the Nabataean kingdom was like the Jeff Bezos of the ancient trading world, rich, powerful, and a bit of an enigma. But even Bezos has to deal with market shifts, and for the Nabataeans, those shifts came in the form of changing trade routes. You see, the economic tides were turning. The rise of new maritime routes across the Red Sea and the expansion of overland routes through Palmyra started to divert the incense trade that had once flowed so lucratively through Petra. Imagine your best revenue stream suddenly getting siphoned off. It's not exactly a cause for celebration. Add to this mix a few questionable leadership decisions, and you've got a recipe for trouble. The last Nabataean king, Rabble-Roman II, was more of a behind-the-scenes operator than a charismatic frontman. While he may have had a knack for maintaining peace with Rome, likely through a mix of tributes and diplomacy, he wasn't exactly the kind of leader who could galvanize a kingdom facing economic turbulence. It's like having a CEO who's great at board meetings, but not so great at steering the ship through a storm. And then there's the Roman Empire itself, a juggernaut that, by this time, stretched from Britain to Egypt. Their expansion wasn't just about land. It was about securing trade routes and resources. The Romans were like history's ultimate hedge fund managers, always looking for the next big acquisition. The Nabataean kingdom, with its strategic location and dwindling but still significant wealth, was simply too tempting to resist. So why didn't the Nabataeans put up more of a fight? Well, let's just say that when you're a small kingdom sandwiched between the Roman Empire and a shifting economic landscape, your options start looking slim. The Nabataeans attempted to adapt. There are records of them trying to diversify their economy by investing in agriculture and local industries. Picture them planting date palms and setting up workshops, a bit like an ancient startup pivoting to survive. But the harsh reality was that, without their trade monopoly, they were like a pop band trying to make it big without a chart-topping single. When the Romans finally made their move in AD 106, the annexation was surprisingly smooth. It was less of a conquering and more of a corporate handover. The Nabataeans didn't go out with a bang, but rather a bureaucratic whimper. The kingdom was absorbed into the Roman province of Arabia Petrea, and life, for the most part, carried on. But make no mistake, this wasn't the happy ending of a merger. It was the slow fading of a once bright star. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The Nabataeans, for all their ingenuity and adaptability, couldn't outmaneuver the geopolitical forces at play. Their legacy, however, endures far beyond their political demise. Petra remained a bustling city under Roman rule, its architectural wonders continuing to draw visitors and traders. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, saw the value in maintaining the city's infrastructure and even expanded it. Yet, Petra's glory days, as the epicenter of the incense trade, were over, and the Nabataean story, as an independent kingdom, had reached its denouement. In the grand tapestry of history, they serve as a reminder of how even the most innovative and adaptable societies can find themselves at the mercy of larger, unyielding forces. Their decline wasn't a failure. It was a testament to the relentless march of time and change, a sobering lesson in the importance of adaptability and foresight. So, as we consider the Nabataeans' fate, let's remember them not just for their stunning rock-carved city or their savvy trading skills, but for their ultimate resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. They didn't vanish into the sands. They evolved, leaving behind a legacy of innovation, cultural fusion, and a lesson on the impermanence of power. As the Roman banners unfurled over Petra, the Nabataean story didn't so much end as it transformed, becoming a part of the broader narrative of human history, a story still etched in the rose-red cliffs of Petra for us to ponder and admire. If there's one thing history has taught us, it's that the sands of time are as relentless as they are transformative. The Nabataeans, those intrepid desert entrepreneurs, might have faded into the annals of the Roman Empire, but the echoes of their legacy still reverberate through the canyons of Petra. Fast forward to the 19th century, a time when European explorers were romping around the Middle East like kids on a treasure hunt. Enter Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, a Swiss explorer with a flair for adventure and an alias that would make any spy envious. Disguised as an Arab, Burckhardt stumbled upon Petra in 1812, and the world was reminded of the Nabataeans' once magnificent kingdom. Now, Burckhardt didn't exactly have Instagram to document his find, but his discovery rippled through Europe like a spicy piece of gossip at a high society ball. Suddenly, the Nabataeans were back in vogue, their story revitalized in the imaginations of the West. Petra, with its rose-red facades and enigmatic aura, became the ultimate romantic getaway for the 19th century mind, a place where archaeology met adventure. But let's not get swept away by these romantic notions. The rediscovery of Petra wasn't just about stirring the hearts of Victorian adventurers. It was a stark reminder of the Nabataeans' architectural genius and their unparalleled knack for blending style with survival. As we delve into the modern perceptions of the Nabataeans, it's vital to separate fact from fantasy. Hollywood, with its penchant for embellishment, has often portrayed Petra as some clandestine lair of lost treasures or a backdrop for heroic escapades. Cue Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. While the dramatic imagery sells movie tickets, it glosses over the gritty reality of life in a desert kingdom. Petra wasn't just an ancient amusement park. It was a bustling metropolis with all the chaos and complexity that comes with urban life, complete with water shortages and the occasional Roman tax collector dropping by to shake things up. Yet, there's no denying the Nabataeans' genuine contributions to trade and culture. Their expertise in water management, for instance, was nothing short of miraculous. They turned the desert into a sustainable haven, a feat that modern engineers could take a lesson from. Their system of cisterns and channels was a masterclass in efficiency, capturing every precious drop of rainwater and ensuring the survival of their city. It's like they took Murphy's Law and flipped it on its head. Anything that can go wrong in the desert didn't, thanks to their meticulous planning. Moreover, the Nabataeans were cultural brokers, facilitating exchanges between diverse civilizations. Their trade routes were like the Silk Road's cooler cousin, where goods and ideas flowed as freely as the caravans that carried them. This cultural fusion was reflected in their art and architecture, a visual testament to their openness and adaptability. They were the original influencers, long before the term became synonymous with social media and product placement. But what about their language and script? The Nabataean alphabet, a precursor to modern Arabic, is a reminder of their lasting impact on the linguistic landscape of the Middle East. It's a testament to their identity, a blend of Aramaic and Arabic influences that has survived the test of time. In a world where languages are constantly evolving, the Nabataean script was like a linguistic time capsule, preserving a snapshot of a bygone era. So, how would the Nabataeans fare in today's world? Imagine them as startup founders, tackling the challenges of globalization with the same ingenuity they applied to the desert. Their knack for strategic alliances would serve them well in the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, while their expertise in resource management would make them champions of sustainability. They'd be the kind of entrepreneurs who could turn a barren landscape into a thriving enterprise, proving that innovation is just as much about perspective as it is about technology. Ultimately, the Nabataean story is a reminder of the delicate balance between ambition and adaptability. They were a people who understood that success in the harshest of environments required not just survival skills, but a vision for the future. Their legacy, etched into the cliffs of Petra, is a testament to the enduring power of creativity and resilience in the face of uncertainty. In the end, the Nabataeans teach us that history is not just about the rise and fall of empires, but about the enduring influence of ideas and innovations that transcend time. As we wander through the silent streets of Petra, we're reminded that beneath the layers of dust and myth lies a story of human ingenuity, a story that continues to inspire and challenge us to see the world not as it is, but as it could be. So next time you find yourself caught between a rock and a hard place, think of the Nabataeans. They didn't just carve their dreams into stone. They turned them into a legacy that refuses to fade into the sands of time.